Chapter 1. The Water Remembers.
Chapter Separator. The sea did not forget. Not the names. Not the blood. Not the music stitched into the bones of cities drowned under centuries of silence. Kaya swam low beneath the broken spines of the old town, past rusted street lamps that grew coral-like blossoms in a graveyard. Her fingers brushed a cracked lamppost where the word Glenmire curled in corroded bronze. Above, the surface churned with moonlit waves. Below, shadows stretched like morning veils across the ruins. The town still spoke, even if no one walked its streets. Pavement had long since eroded to sand, and the buildings were husks, fleshless, skeletal things that groaned when the current touched them. Kaya moved through them silently, long coils of kelp-dark hair flowing behind her like a comet's tail. Her skin shimmered with the shimmer of the sea, scales laced along her back and thighs, the mark of the tide-bound. She didn't need her voice here. The water carried all things. Echoes, memories, warnings. She only had to listen. They're the old school. Its roof had collapsed during the first quake back when the Red Cross Army had bombed the hills. Someone had painted suns on the bricks. Sun faces with black features, lips wide with joy, eyes sharp and proud. Now they wept blue algae. Kaya pressed her palm to the mural, eyes fluttering closed as the tide whispered a name into her bones. Nia. She sang at lunch, she drew stars on the desk. She died in the second surge. The voices came like that, sudden and aching. They were not ghosts. They were songs, pieces of breath caught in salt and stone. Her gift was to gather them. Kaya turned, drifting deeper into the wreckage, letting the ocean pull her where it would. She passed what was once a mansion, stripped down to a ribcage of wood and marble. There had been hundreds across the south, she'd read in the coral vaults, palatial homes owned by black sovereigns, their lineages traced in gold-threaded quilts and oral dynasties. When the Red Cross came, they turned them to ash, carved them into plantations, and later stole their ruins for exhibits at world's fairs. But the sea had taken some back. This one whispered too. It said, "We were royalty before cotton, before chains. We ruled with clean hands. They feared us for it." Then came the hum. Faint, irregular. Not oceanic, not alive. Kaya's head snapped up. Something pulsed near the trench ledge. Her gills flared wide and she moved with speed, darting through tangled rebar and sea glass corridors until she reached the edge of Glenmire Deep. It was darker here, where the land collapsed into a steep ravine. Her people were forbidden from going too far. The rift maw slept beneath. Or it had. She spotted the light before she found the body. A figure floated there, tangled in kelp, bleeding into the water. Male. Human. Surface-born. The glow came from something embedded in his chest, a sigil pulsing red and white, like some twisted mockery of a holy symbol. Kaya felt the salt twist around her in warning, the sea recoiling. This boy was branded, marked, and dying. She should have left him. She knew the law, surface things brought corruption. And yet, he moaned. His breath, half choked with sea, stirred a current that shaped her name into the water. Not his mouth. His presence. That was impossible. No surface-born could speak in wave song. Kaya reached for him. The coral on her wrist flared, resisting. Her mother's voice thundered in her memory. "You are tide-bound. We survive because we do not intervene. If they drown, they chose the land over the ocean. Let them drown." And still, Kaya held the boy, tore away the kelp, and placed her hand over the sigil, trying to quiet its burn. She sang, not a full chorus, not enough to awaken the maw, just a thread of water magic, a filament of name and salt and mercy. The sigil hissed and died. The trench rumbled. Far below something stirred. Kaya's eyes widened. She felt the rift maw shift in its prison, a yawning hunger blinking awake after generations of sleep. The waters tightened, pressing like a fist around her spine. The boy coughed, gasped, alive, and Kaya realized she had broken more than law. She had broken the lock. Kaya swam upward, dragging the unconscious boy with her, though every nerve screamed that she had violated something sacred. The sea's pulse no longer welcomed her. The water recoiled from her touch as though she carried a disease. Above her, moonlight shimmered across the waves, fractured into pale blades by the restless currents. When her head broke the surface, wind met her like a rebuke. The air carried the iron scent of old war, of ash and rust, remnants of the fires that had once blackened the shores. She hauled the boy to a jagged outcrop, a piece of submerged highway now overgrown with seagrass and barnacles. It jutted like a broken tongue from the water, half forgotten by both land and sea. Here, Kaya laid him down and pressed her hand to his chest again. The sigil no longer burned, but its mark remained, a red cross etched in skin, not by ink but by something ancient and foreign. Not magic. Doctrine. She'd read about it in the forbidden scrolls hidden in the abyssal shelves, relics of the Vatican Templars and the First War, when the Red Cross army was unleashed as a cleansing flood, not a healing one. Where there are sovereigns, one scroll had read, we bring the tide of order. Where there are flames of inheritance, we bring water to smother the ember. They had called themselves peacemakers. In truth, they were erasers. And yet, this boy. His features were unmistakably of the sun-browned kind Kaya knew. Hair like coiled tide grass, skin the shade of low-light bronze. A child of the drowned towns. He looked no older than 16, yet his chest bore that hateful symbol. His lungs sputtered seawater, then breath. The spell had worked. The law had been broken. The rift maw had stirred. Kaya turned her eyes back to the sea, its surface now disturbingly still. The silence was not peace. It was tension, the kind that preceded a scream. A cry rippled through the waves behind her. A high, keening note that bent the wind and made the water quiver. Kaya froze. The sound was not from this world. It came from the veiled deep, a fissure older than the rift, where the original sovereigns had been cast by force and flame. She'd only heard that song once before, when the last city sank. Years ago, her own grandmother had vanished into the sea when Crescent Fall was breached. Not by nature but by design. The land they'd been forced to settle after the first flood had still held magic, deep under the fields and forests. But once the Boy Scout engineers rerouted the waterways, once the hydro lines and siphons cracked open their reservoirs, those towns had become tombs. The townsfolk had been given no time, no warning. Whole families turned to statues of salt. The Red Cross Army declared them casualties of instability, not targets of war. And the Vatican recorded them as sovereigns lost at sea. Kaya clenched her jaw. She had grown up hearing that phrase whispered in derision. Lost at sea. As if they had drifted away willingly. As if they had no names. The boy stirred beside her. His lips parted, and he spoke a name she had not expected to hear. Isser. Kaya's heart stumbled. Isser was a name from the pre-flood records. One of the original forekeepers who held the shard doors beneath Glenmire Deep. Relics used to seal the maw and scatter the magic of the sovereigns into the oceans. Only the tidebound could hear those names now, pass from choral to choral in sibilant fragments. That a surface-born boy could speak it, even in delirium, meant he was no ordinary survivor. He was a key. Suddenly, the water around the outcrop rippled, not from wind, but presence. Kaya turned and saw them rise, 3 figures clad in storm-black armor, their faces masked by bone helmets carved from the jaws of drowned leviathans. The vigil. The wardens of the maw. You've broken a cord, one hissed. Voice like salt dragged across rusted metal. Kaya stood, shielding the boy with her body. He was dying. He was meant to. Another warden stepped forward, spear in hand. You've awakened the maw's edge. The rift breathes again. Do you know what you've done? Kaya didn't flinch. Yes. I've remembered. That stopped them. Silence held for a breath, then 2. The third warden tilted her head. You carry blood older than the cities. We will give you a choice. Kaya's stomach turned. She knew what they would say. No trial. No mediation. Exile. Or silencing. She looked down at the boy, now breathing evenly, face slack in sleep. Then at the sea, her sea, once her ally, now holding its breath. And still, she remembered what her grandmother had whispered the day the last town fell. The water remembers. The land was taken. But the tide does not lie. I choose neither, Kaya said. I choose to wake what sleeps. The warden hissed. But before they could strike, the water surged, not as enemy but as ally. A spiral of light burst beneath them, ancient glyphs flaring along the boy's skin. The sigil returned, changed now inverted. The red cross twisted into a wave-bound eye. The boy opened his eyes. The sea screamed. Kaya didn't have time to think. The boy's eyes gleamed like stormlit kelp, twin spirals of ink and cobalt flashing with something older than any breath she had known. His chest pulsed again, once then thrice, and the ripple of magic that bled from his skin was thick as brine and hot as memory. The warden stepped back, spears clutched but unthrown, faces unreadable behind their calcified masks. Even the sea quieted. The waves did not retreat, they bowed. The boy stood, unsteady but upright, and his mouth opened to release a sound that wasn't language. It was mourning, the low-sung ache of funerals unspoken and names unburied. Kaya felt it in her marrow. She remembered the night her brother had disappeared beneath the Glenmire floodwaters, remembered the oil-slick surface and the silence that followed. The sound this boy made was the sound she'd never let herself utter. And now it was out open, vibrating through the sea and sky like a bell struck at the center of the world. The Riftmaw heard it. A chasm opened beneath the surface with a terrible sound, as if the ocean itself were inhaling for the first time in centuries. The water did not boil, but shimmered with energy Kaya had only heard described in whispers, sovereign pulse. The old kind. The kind that turned tides and shattered towers and once called castles from the stone. The kind buried when the Red Cross leveled every place they could not control. The kind the Vatican had ordered sealed beneath concrete and altar and God. And still it survived. The vigil fell to one knee. All three. Spears dipped, but not in surrender, in recognition. The boy looked around, confused, dazed, then dropped to his knees as if the weight of it all had returned at once. "Who am I?" he whispered. Kaya knelt beside him. "You're a name the sea almost forgot. But I heard it." She touched his forehead, letting the ocean's warmth rise through her fingertips. "Your name is Isser now. That's what the water called you." His eyes watered. "Isser?" And behind them the rift closed again, not with peace but with promise. A warning. The warden stepped into the sea and vanished, their task complete or perhaps only paused. Kaya helped Isser to his feet, every bone in her body aching with consequence. She had chosen wrong or right, it no longer mattered. The choice was done. They stood together on that broken slab of drowned land, surrounded by nothing but ocean and memory. And the wind whispered one last time, soft but certain. "They thought they drowned us. But the sea does not bury truth." Kaya squeezed Isser's hand and looked toward the horizon. The journey would begin before dawn. The ocean had opened. The sovereigns had not died. They had simply been waiting.
Chapter 2. Black Salt and Bone.
Chapter Separator. Dawn cracked open like a bruised shell. The light didn't warm the sea. It only scattered across its surface, pale and nervous, as if even the sun wasn't sure it belonged here anymore. Kaya and Isser drifted through the kelp-thick shallows just beyond the broken causeway of what had once been Glenmire's easternmost avenue. Beneath them lay rooftops crusted in barnacle street lamps that swayed like kelp stalks, and the bones of ancestors unnamed. Kaya could feel them all. The deeper they swam, the louder the silence became. A pressurized hush that settled in her ears and behind her teeth. The drowned towns weren't dead. They were dreaming. Isser's breathing had steadied, though his expression still bore the glassy tautness of someone newly untethered. He said little. But when his fingers brushed the stone road beneath them, or a mailbox, or a rusted weather vane jutting from a submerged chapel roof, Kaya watched something pass through him. A flicker, a hum. The boy was still reassembling himself from what the rift had made him forget. "I remember this place," he muttered at last. "I think this was where my mother—" He stopped short, eyes narrowing. There was a gate. Big, with iron fish and symbols cut into the frame. A school, maybe. Or a hall. Kaya knew it. All tidebound did. "That was the Sovereign Hall," she said. "Not by name. Not officially. But it's where they kept the records. Before the Red Cross bombed the dam. Before the scouts rerouted the water and told the world it was an accident of gravity." Isser looked at her, a question resting just behind his lips. Kaya answered it before he asked. They lied. The world's old powers made sure nobody would mourn our names. So they rebranded what they destroyed. Our towns became training sites. Our manors became plantations. Our castles? Stolen stone, refitted into world's fairs. Every column and gate you see now in their cities was pulled from ours. Isser didn't flinch. Maybe he knew. Maybe he always had. Then why aren't we fighting? He asked. Kaya gave a bitter smile. We are. But not the way they want us to. The tide shifted, and a burst of sand spiraled upward from the seabed. A shape took form just ahead of them, a low, sprawling wreck half covered in sea moss and dotted with limpets. This was no ordinary ruin. Kaya slowed, gestured for Isser to stop, and pressed her hand against a barnacle-cloaked tile. The water shimmered at her touch. Glyphs, long buried, flickered blue and gold beneath the algae. A gate. Not a door of wood or stone, this one made from tide-locked memory. The sovereign halls were seated with them across the coastlines, built before the Vatican exiles, before the Wobblies or the dam bombings, before the great migrations from the hills and hidden enclaves. Back when the sovereign still walked the land with names that made the earth bow. This is one of them, Kaya whispered. A passage. A place where voices live in the coral. We'll rest here. But we listen. No speaking once we enter. Only remembrance. Isser nodded. The gate shimmered and opened without hinges, dissolving into strands of light like salt unbinding from the sea. They swam through. Inside, the ruin was vast. What had once been a library or council chamber now stretched open like a sunken cathedral. Shelves stood crooked but unbroken, carved with spiral motifs, shells within shells. The floor bore the pattern of a compass that spun in slow motion beneath their feet, caught between tides of memory and magic. Above them, glassless windows let in filtered rays of sunlight, illuminating the floating motes of what Kaya called remembrant, the water's memory, condensed into dust that never truly settled. As they moved deeper, the walls pulsed with voice. Not words, not in any tongue she'd learned, but impressions, screams without air, laughter that turned brittle, lullabies warped by flood. The sea remembered everything, even the fear. Especially the fear. A shadow moved across the far wall. Kaya's heart jumped. She reached for the blade at her belt, carved from lionfish spine and shaped like a crescent wave, but held. The figure stepped into view. Not a warden. Not a soldier. An elder. Her body was wrapped in the long pale coils of ocean-born linen, her hair knotted with pieces of obsidian and coral, each one humming softly. She walked barefoot along the floor of the ruin as though she owned every stone. Kaya bowed. Isser followed, uncertain. Elder Nene, Kaya said. Breaker Kaya, the elder returned. Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. You've caused a tremor that shook the deepest trenches. The maw opened last night. Why? Kaya met the elder's eyes. To save him. And because something's coming. Bigger than the vigil. Deeper than the maw. Nene studied Isser. Her eyes narrowed. Then softened. You carry a name the sea cried for, she murmured to him. Isser. That is not your birth name, but it is your calling. You were born here, weren't you? I think so, Isser said. But they took me. I remember wires. Needles. Salt that wasn't sea. Men in white robes who didn't blink. The elder's expression turned grave. Then it has begun. What has? Kaya asked. The severing, Nene said. They've taken another. A tide-born child. Not just kidnapped. They're trying to rewrite the water in their blood. If they succeed, they'll do more than silence us. They'll unname us completely. Kaya felt the ground sway beneath her, though the room was still. Where? The Crescent Fall, Nene said. But that place is sealed. You'd need 3 blood keys to pass through its curtain. Kaya's hand closed over Isser's. Then we find the other 2. You'll be hunted, the elder warned. The sea is watching you, Kaya Arch. And the rift does not forget. Kaya straightened. Neither do I. Behind her, Isser's breath quickened. The compass beneath their feet spun once more, and settled. The next path had been chosen. Kaya lingered in the chamber long after Elder Nene's presence had drifted like mist beyond the coral threshold. The walls pulsed faintly with residual energy. Sea glow veins lit dimly beneath drift glass and calcified memory. The sea hummed through her bones. The weight of what she had done, the saving of Isser, the breaking of sacred law, the awakening of something older than the Reef Codex, settled into her spine like silt. The world had changed. The silence she'd once thought was safety had been a prison. Now it cracked, and the light that spilled through came shaped like names, pain, and reckoning. "She called me Tideborn," Isser said behind her. His voice was tentative, frayed like seagrass pulled from brine. Kaya didn't turn. "You are." "I don't remember anything. Not even water. I just remember fire. Sirens. The smell of something burning that wasn't wood. Then the dark. That's how it starts for many of us. The burning, the drowning. The loss. The men who smile while laying waste to everything sacred. Then they report back that nothing survived. They say our sovereigns were lost. That our names were lost. But the water remembers. And so do we. Even when we think we don't." She finally turned to him. He was watching her now, uncertain. Fragile like coral not yet hardened by current. "Memory is not just what you carry, Isser. It's what carries you. You'll remember. In time. In tide." He nodded, though doubt still wreathed his features. It was the way he stood, rigid, disconnected from the flow around them. Still too much land in his bones. Still too much ash. It would fade. In time. The sea would wear it down. But the cracks in him, the ones from the fire, from the world that had stolen him, would never truly disappear. They would shape his currents. They would shape his power. She led him from the elder's chamber. Out beyond the temple's hollow sanctum, the expanse of Glenmire deep stretched vast and wounded. Stone ribs of what had once been coral towers jutted upward like the bones of drowned giants. Sea anemones swayed in the cracks, pulsing in time with something deeper than sound. Kaya moved through it like someone born of its marrow, but she could feel the shifts now. The echoes. The water had always whispered, but now it spoke in tongues shaped by war and waking. "The blood keys," she said. Elder Nene spoke of 3. Isser followed her carefully, weaving through pillars of coral and shattered archways. "You mean me? You're one of them. Your blood opened the threshold. You're tied to the old lines. That means you've been marked since before you were even born. I don't understand what that means. It means the sea didn't forget you, even when the world did." She paused, adjusting her trajectory. "The others are harder to find. But I know where to start." "Where?" "One will be among the Bone Daughters." He tilted his head. "Who?" "They live in the reef forests past Crescent Fall. What's left of the waterbound who refused to run when the Red Cross Army burned our castles and turned our mansions into showpieces. They took the bones of their dead and built sanctums. Memory sanctums. They guard names the world tried to erase. They guard power the world never deserved." His voice was quiet. "And the other?" Kaya's eyes shifted to the west, where the currents thickened and light fled. "The morning chain." Isser flinched. "That's not real." "It wasn't," she said. "Not until they drowned Hallows Bluff. That town never surfaced. Not even the rooftops. The chain didn't just bury the people there. Kept them. Bound them. The rift took root in that silence." They swam on, deeper into the ruins, where the bones of old structures grew wild with reef bloom. A hum stirred through the current. Not from the earth, not from the reef, but from something watching. Kaya froze mid-motion. "We're not alone." Isser stiffened. "What is it?" She didn't answer right away. Her pulse thudded against her jaw as her eyes narrowed into the drift. A shadow slipped through the water ahead. Elongated, limbless, oily and wrong. Veilback. Not of the rift fully, but warped by its touch. Once human. Once whole. Twisted by rupture, by the breaking of sea law. They hunted Tideborn for what their blood held. Memory that couldn't be drowned. Kaya unsheathed her coral blade. "Stay behind me." The veilback hissed, a sound that vibrated through the stone beneath their feet. Another shadow followed it. 2 now. Kaya moved. Her blade flashed silver in the half-light, cutting an arc through the water. The first creature twisted away, but she sliced through one of its tendrils. It shrieked, voice rattling the reef wall, and lunged back. She dropped low, spinning through the water, dragging the blade across its flank. Her song rose in her throat, not melody but frequency, an ancient vibrato that churned the water around her into resonance. Glyphs awoke on the ruined pillars. Old protections, salt script carved into coral by drowned architects of the early tides. The veilbacks reeled. The second creature crashed into her side, but Kaya surged with the current, flipped, slashed down, her blade biting deep into the creature's gill folds. It writhed, shrieked, died. The first fled. Kaya stood trembling, not from fear, but from the echo left in her bones by the power she'd drawn. Isser floated behind a broken wall of coral, wide-eyed. "You moved like you've done that 1,000 times, he whispered. Kaya exhaled, sheathing the blade. "I have. In dreams. In memories. In blood." The ocean carries all our stories. The body just remembers last. He didn't speak for a long time. The water thickened around them as they descended toward the southern reef shelf. Kaya could feel the pull in her chest, the bone daughters calling. Memory was waking, but so was the rift. The maw did not open all at once. It yawned like grief, quiet, slow, inevitable. "They turned our homes into exhibits," she said, almost to herself. "Burned our towns and said we were lost. Then they reported to the Vatican that the sovereigns were dead. That we were nothing but ghosts. Lost at sea," Isser whispered. "That's what the papers called them." She nodded. "But the sea does not lose what belongs to it. It keeps. It remembers. It binds." Her voice was low, almost reverent, as if afraid the water itself might answer too soon. Isser swam beside her now, no longer trailing, no longer looking back. His silhouette cut through the murk with steadier rhythm, his breath sinking with the ebb and pull of the ruins. Kaya watched him out of the corner of her eye, watched the way the water curved around him, how the remembrant motes clung to his skin like they recognized him. Perhaps they did. Perhaps he was not just a child lost, but a key waiting to turn. Far ahead, the ruins thinned into forest. Not of trees but of bone. Great skeletal stalks rose from the seabed, bleached white and coral-pocked, reaching upward like prayerful hands. The forest of the bone daughters. Kaya felt the shift in pressure, the quiet recoil of the current around sacred ground. Here even the rift dared not creep too close. Not without bleeding. She tightened her grip on the coral blade and whispered, not to Isser but to the sea itself, "We are not forgotten. We are tide-bound. And we have come home."
Chapter 3. Status. Lost at Sea.
Chapter Separator. They left the cliffs before the second tide, before the red kelp could rise like veils from the deep and mark their passage. Kaya moved without words, her gaze fixed on the mist-drowned path ahead, where coralstone arches marked the descent into the tide caverns. Isser followed, half stumbling, still disoriented from the night before. The sea had not stopped watching them. Neither had the tide matrons. At the threshold, Kaya turned, but she did not speak. She didn't need to. The look she gave him, part warning, part apology, told him what waited below was no sanctuary. It was judgment. The tide gate opened with a groan of living coral, bioluminescent veins blinking once before dimming again, as though unwilling to witness what passed. Inside, the world pressed inward with wet silence. The air was thick with brine and memory, and the deeper they walked, the more Isser felt something pulling at the edges of his thoughts. Distant echoes, not words but weight. When they reached the final corridor, Kaya paused before the seal. Her hand hovered over the glyph-scarred surface, uncertain. Then, with a breath, she pressed her palm to the heartstone and stepped aside. The chamber opened around them like a lung exhaling. At the center stood a throne of driftwood and black shell, and in it Kaya's mother. Matron Sale was not veiled in sea silk or crowned in salt glass like the songs described. She wore no adornment save the tide brands etched into her skin, one for each judgment passed, one for each oath broken and restored. Her presence was the weight of deep water, crushing and vast. Her voice, when it came, was colder than the stone underfoot. You brought him here. Kaya knelt not in submission but as a shield. He was dying. I chose to save him. You chose to invite a waking curse into our sanctum. Sale's eyes, reefstone gray, fixed on the boy. You don't know what he carries. I know what I saw, Kaya said, voice low but unyielding. I saw the spiral. I felt the rift pulse through him. He's one of us. He is not, Sale said, rising. He is something else. The sea does not mark lightly. It has remembered him for a reason, and so will the others. Do you think the current weavers won't smell his presence? Do you think the deep choir will remain silent? Isser stepped forward, unsteady but defiant. I didn't ask for any of this. I don't even know what this is. You are a fracture, Sale said, her voice echoing in the tide-hollow chamber. You are the breath before the break. And my daughter is blind if she thinks the sea sings without reason. Kaya rose. He's not the only one waking. I saw the glyph stone. I saw the drowned map shift. This isn't a curse, it's a call. Sale turned away. Then let the sea call him. Let it claim what it already owns. She gestured, and the tide guard emerged from the shadows. Coral plate armor, trident in hand, face masked in polished obsidian. Take the boy to the eastern hold. He is to be confined until the moon shifts. Kaya stepped in front of Isser, fists clenched. He hasn't done anything. And neither did the last one, Sale said. The boy with the mark, the song in his blood. Do you remember what he did, Kaya? How many drowned? Kaya flinched. That was before. This is different. Only the name changes. Sale looked at her daughter, softer now, but no less resolute. You will remain here under watch. Your bond with the boy compromises your judgment. Kaya's mouth parted, stunned. You're isolating me? You chose the surface over the song, Sale said. Now you will learn silence. The tide guard moved between them. Isser was already being led away, his protests muffled by the growing distance. Kaya didn't fight. Not with her fists. Not with her song. But her eyes stayed on him until the shadows took him, and she did not look away even then. They kept her in the old vaults, the ones carved from basalt ribs beneath the southern flow. No light reached them but what the biolumes carried, flickering like the dreams of dead leviathans. Her only companions were the songs that clung to the walls, resonances from past judgments, too old to be fully forgotten. Kaya paced until the floor remembered her steps. She had been down here once before as a child, after defying her mother during the choral rites. That time had been brief. This time she sensed the depth of Sale's fear, and it frightened her more than the confinement. Her mother was never afraid, not even when the surface ships came, not even when the matrons voted to abandon the Concord with the Veiled. But now? Now she was silent in the way of women who saw the storm before the wave. And if she feared Isser's mark, it meant something worse had begun to stir. Kaya sat with her back against the wall and closed her eyes. She reached into herself. Not with words but with resonance. She had been born to the songline, taught from her earliest breath how to read the sea's moods through blood and breath. Now she listened. Not to the water outside but the currents within. The spiral in Isser's chest had not been just a sigil. It had been a response. A key offered by something too old for scripture. She had touched him in the rift and felt the echo. He was not just the future. He was a forgotten debt returning to collect. And the sea always remembered its debts. Far above, the matrons convened. Far below, the sea moved around her cell. And somewhere between, Isser sat alone in saltstone silence, staring at his hands, waiting to understand why the sea had called him at all. Kaya didn't sleep. The vault's silence was a living thing, pressing in close, whispering through stone and memory. Every sound from above, a drip of condensation, the distant hum of a conchorn ward, carried meaning, but none of it offered comfort. The sea was shifting, and she could feel it in her blood. She sat still as salt crust formed along the floor, her breath shallow, her fingers curling around the charm she wore at her neck. A shard of abyssal bone wrapped in copper-threaded kelp, a relic from her sister's fading. The charm pulsed faintly now, warmed by memory and growing fear. Something about Isser had stirred more than her mother's wrath. It had stirred the vault itself. She had felt it when they brought him in. The way the walls responded to his presence, like an old wound flinching before the knife. That kind of reaction only came from resonance. And resonance always meant one thing: ancestral return. She pressed her ear to the basalt wall, tuning herself to the lower registers of the vault's heart. First there was only silence. Then a tremor, soft and rhythmic, like an oar dipping into the deep. A presence. No more than that. A pattern. She had studied the old glyphs, learned the drowning scripts etched into the tide glass of the inner sanctum. She knew how to interpret echo chords. This one didn't belong to their people, but it was adjacent. A cousin song. A forgotten kin returning to the fold. She closed her eyes and followed the rhythm inward, matching it to Issar's breath in memory. Fit. Somehow impossibly it fit. He wasn't just a boy marked by the sea. He was part of the sea, but from a lineage no longer spoken of in tide matron circles. And that's what terrified her mother. The matrons had purged the salt lines a generation ago, after the Waking War, when the Abyss Choir rose and tried to flood the sunken cities with rift chant. They'd sealed the old bloodlines, abandoned the deep sigils, and buried the war call beneath generations of silence. Anyone showing signs of resonance outside approved channels was exiled, or worse, drowned and returned as kelp-bound. And now here was Isser, a boy who remembered nothing, marked by a spiral no matron dared speak of. Her mother must have known the pattern, must have recognized it, and chosen to isolate Kaya rather than expose her to the matron's full judgment. It was a cruel kindness, but it would not protect Isser. If the others discovered him before Kaya could act, they wouldn't hesitate. The old fears ran too deep. A sharp whistle cut through the vault, a shift tone. Someone was changing guard above. Kaya rose slowly, stretching aching limbs. She walked the perimeter again, tracing the same circuit she had since her confinement, but this time she paused at the drain vent near the rear wall. It wasn't large, but she wasn't trying to escape. She pressed her palm against the vent's edge and whispered a single note. A resonance code. One known only to her and her younger cousin, Nalian, from when they were still playing drift tag in the coral towers. A silly thing then. A survival right now. She waited. Minutes passed. Then a tremble. The faintest flutter in the vent. It meant heard. Not safe, not clear. But heard. It was enough. If Nalian could get the message to the conduit wardens, or better yet, the lore sister seal beneath the forgotten reef, maybe Kaya could buy Isser time. Maybe she could stall the vote. She only needed a day, maybe less. A crack in the tide plate. That's all revolutions ever needed. She turned from the wall and closed her eyes again, whispering to the currents inside her veins. They answered slowly, like creatures waking from hibernation. Kaya had never tested the full reach of her gift. Her mother feared it, especially after her sister drowned herself in the undertide to quiet the storm inside her voice. But Kaya didn't feel madness in her resonance. Only urgency. Isser wasn't just a boy out of place. He was a harbinger. A fault line walking. And if he wasn't protected, he wouldn't be the only one destroyed. Somewhere far above, she imagined him staring at the walls of his own cell, unaware of what boiled beneath him. Did he hear the sea differently now? Did he feel the pull of the tide in his breath the way she did? Like a tether uncoiling from the depths? The spiral on his chest, it wasn't just a mark. It was a key. But to what? The vault trembled once more, stronger this time. Kaya froze. Not from the vent. From the structure itself. A surge pulse. That wasn't possible. Those were only triggered by rift shifts. She stepped back as the vault lights dimmed, the bioluminescent strings flickering violet, then blood red. The sea was responding. Not to her. Not to the matrons. But to something deeper. Something forgotten. Her cell door remained sealed, but she no longer felt alone. The sea was stirring. And the drowned were waking. The walls breathed around her, the pulse of the sea matching her own as Kaya stood still, listening to the silence unravel. She had trained all her life to read resonance shifts, but this wasn't a shift. It was a summons. The kind older than any charted depth, older even than the matron's first tongues. The color of the lights had turned, a sign of a deep-sea reaction, not just emotional but ancestral. The vaults hadn't pulsed red since the Abyss Choir was driven into exile. That choir had tried to drown the sky itself with rift song. Kaya clenched her fingers around the charm at her neck. If the drowned were truly waking, then Isser wasn't the only key. He was the door. The biolooms shivered again. Then came the sound, a deep thrum, not unlike a leviathan's heart, but steadier, more deliberate. A pattern. Kaya braced herself as the wall behind her pulsed once more, then softened. Not cracked, yielded. She'd heard whispers of this in forbidden chants traded in the coral towers when the Tide Guard weren't listening. Blood resonance strong enough to bend stone, to call the older paths awake. Her mother would deny such power still existed, would say the sea no longer chose. But the sea had never stopped choosing. It had just stopped speaking to those who feared what it might say. Kaya pressed her palm flat against the yielding basalt. This was no escape hatch. It was an invitation. The tremor in the stone grew warmer. Not heat but memory. She felt her sister's breath as if Lyra still lived, felt her song humming just behind the wall. The sea remembered the drowned. It never let go, only waited for the right moment to remind the living what they tried to bury. A crack split along the wall's edge with a hiss of expelled pressure. Water didn't flood in, only mist, dense and cold as sleep. Through the haze, she glimpsed something glimmering. A glyph stone, submerged and bound in salt chains. It pulsed with each of her breaths, echoing the spiral in Isar's chest. She didn't know what would happen if she touched it. But she had no choice. Silence was no longer survival. Silence was surrender. She stepped forward. Her fingers met the stone, and the glyph flared to life. Pain lanced through her arm, memories not her own, voices in tongues older than coral, shouting across a storm-tossed sea. She staggered but didn't fall. Images burned across her vision. A drowned city, its spires hollow and inverted. A boy whose breath turned to current. A mirror cracked with a spiral etched across its face. Then darkness, as if the sea swallowed her whole. When she came to, she was somewhere else. Still in the vault, but deeper. Far beneath the prison cell. In a forgotten sanctum where light couldn't reach. The air buzzed with tension. Something had changed. The glyph stone had transported her, shifted her resonance, bent the current's will to hers. She rose slowly, head pounding, and saw it. The spiral. Not a mark on Isar's chest now, but a great spiral carved into the floor, etched with coral dust and embedded with fragments of drift bone. At its center, a basin filled with brackish water that moved with a current of its own. Above it hovered a single shard of abyssal glass, suspended by unseen force, dripping with ink-black tears. She stepped closer, the spiral vibrating beneath her soles. Her charm pulsed violently now, nearly burning her skin. This was the source. Or maybe just a fragment of it. Whatever force had marked Isser had passed through here long ago, and left a memory behind to wait for its return. She could feel the sea watching through it. Not the sea as the matrons knew it, but something deeper, older, and full of aching hunger. Her hand reached out before she realized what she was doing. The shard dropped into her palm. A scream not hers ripped through the chamber. The waters boiled in the basin. The spiral lit like a rift flare. And Kaya saw everything. She saw Isser alone in his cell, the spiral on his chest glowing faintly now, responding to something across the stone. He sat with his back to the wall, eyes open but unseeing, caught in a trance. Around him the saltstone walls pulsed. Symbols began to rise. Not carved. Grown. Resonance bloom. The kind only born from bloodlines long erased. She saw the tide matrons above, disturbed by the tremor but not yet alarmed. Sail had risen from her throne. Lips pressed thin as she read a shifting glyph projected from a conch. The others watched her. One whispered the name of a forbidden house. Another whispered something worse, the return. Then Kaya saw the drowned. Not metaphor. Not myth. They rose. In the deepest trench below the reef wall, Beneath chains the matrons swore would never break, the drowned choir stirred. They were not rotted corpses or kelp-bound spirits, but those whose resonance had been exiled, sunk, and sealed. And the seal had weakened. She saw their eyes open, saw them move without sound through rift water slick with memory. They were singing again. Her knees gave way, the vision too much. The shard slipped from her fingers. When it struck the floor, the spiral dimmed, but the damage had been done. She knew the truth now. The matrons had lied. The waking war had not ended. It had been postponed. And Isser wasn't the weapon. He was the alarm. The sanctum shivered around her. Somewhere above, a conch horn blared. Emergency resonance. That hadn't sounded in a decade. Kaya pushed herself up and sprinted toward the corridor beyond the spiral, where a slope of bone glass steps spiraled upward. She had to reach the surface. She had to reach Isser. The tide guard wouldn't wait for understanding. They'd act with fear, and fear underwater killed faster than blades. Her lungs burned by the time she reached the mid-chamber. Water began to drip from the seams in the walls. Not just condensation. Leakage. Pressure was shifting fast. She turned a corner, nearly colliding with a figure in black coral plate. A tide guard. Nalian, she gasped. He pulled off his helm, revealing his copper-braided hair and eyes wide with panic. I got your message, he said. I was on rotation when the vault started singing. What the hell did you wake? Kaya grabbed his shoulder. Not me. Isser. We don't have time. They'll kill him. They already sent a purge team to the eastern hold. No, she breathed. No, that's too fast. Sail wouldn't. She's not leading it. Matron Elhira invoked the deep scour right. Full burn. Kaya didn't hesitate. Get me to him. Now. They ran together, vault walls trembling behind them as the song lines twisted, as resonance began to spiral beyond control. Kaya felt it under her skin now, in her blood, Isser's pulse calling to hers like moon to tide. She didn't know what he truly was. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. If the sea drowned him, it would drown everything else with him. And the drowned would not sing alone.
Chapter 4. World Fair Wreckage.
Chapter Separator. The reefscape spread beneath her like a memory no one wanted to admit they'd buried. Kaya swam low, skimming the current, breath regulated through her gill mask as she descended into the ruins. This wasn't part of the standard patrol paths. The matrons kept it off the flowcharts and scrubbed it from the deep route logs. Even the youngest tide guard recruits learned to avoid it, as if touching the place might stain their resonance. But Kaya had come here often as a child, before she knew what it was. Before she learned to call it by the name whispered in the underside of songs, the wreckage. She touched down near a twisted brass railing that had once been a stairwell, now coiled like a serpent's skeleton. Above her, the light from her suborb flickered against rusted turrets and oxidized crystal windows. The buildings were real mansions, towers, concert halls, chapel domes. All uprooted, all fallen, all drowned. The current shifted, and she glimpsed the mural again, half buried in silt and reef growth. A boy with skin like hers, holding up a sky that cracked with gold. Around him, black-robed children ran through streets with names she didn't recognize but felt in her teeth. Lennox, Greenwood, Summerhill, Black Eden. The surface had taken their names. The sea had taken their bones. But the reef remembered, coral growing like veins over storefronts and theater balconies, pink lace creeping up once proud columns. Kaya moved forward, hand trailing along the side of a collapsed bank vault whose door hung open like a jaw. Inside, just shadows. No coin, no gold. Just silence. This had been the World Fair once, above the waves, a century before the tide matrons formed the pact. A celebration of the new vision, they'd called it. A future built from the ruins of the old world. But no one told the children of the old world that the price of a new vision was erasure. Whole cities vanished overnight, lost to storm surge, evacuated ahead of tectonic failure, transferred for aquatic reclamation. Lies varnished into textbook gloss. Kaya had read the classified reef shells. These cities weren't lost. They were taken. Carved from the surface like rot from a tree and dumped into the sea with ceremony. Not to honor but to forget. She stopped near what must have been a theater. Its awning was a ribcage of steel. A faded placard floated nearby, tethered to a coral hook by accident. The Black Imaginarium Presence, Rememory. A faint echo rippled through the water. She turned slowly. Nothing. But the silence here was different. Waited. A silence that remembered voices, thick with static and salt. She adjusted her wristband to amplify resonance. The glyphs flickered uncertainly, catching pieces of old song. Static pulled syllables that danced at the edge of meaning. A name surfaced, Amari. Then another, Hollowgate. Both names she'd seen carved in dry shell tombs near the deep archives. Names of architects. Dreamers. People who'd built futures from nothing and had them stolen by everything. Kaya drifted further in. Her light caught a collapsed rooftop garden. Underneath, a family's dinner table sat enshrined in reef. Plates still arranged. Cups upside down. Frozen in the moment the water had come. She looked away. The coral here didn't just reclaim, it sanctified. Made memorials of every home it devoured. But the ocean wasn't weeping. Didn't mourn. It remembered without mercy. And that's what scared the matrons most. That one day memory would rise. Something pulsed in the east quarter. A deep resonance signature, familiar, wrong. Kaya spun, drawing her harpoon blade as she approached. The signal grew louder, not stronger, fragmented, like a dying heartbeat. She reached the source and her breath hitched. A drone. Old model. One of the Surface Initiative's early deep explorers, half consumed by coral. She touched it. It came alive in a flicker of pale blue. The echo it broadcast sent ice through her spine. Subject. Designation Isser. Echo found. Subject origin traced to ozone. Wreckage. She staggered back. The wreckage? Of course. The spiral wasn't just a relic. It was a birthmark. Kaya stared at the drone's cracked casing. If Isser had come from here, if his resonance had emerged from this forgotten reef, then the matrons had lied about more than a prophecy. They'd buried a child here. And now the sea was returning him. A low moan drifted through the silt, like whale song corrupted. She turned again and this time saw them. Figures in the fog. Not human. Not machine. Shadow-bent and coral-veined. The choir. The drowned who walked. Their eyes were reefs. Their mouths were hymnals. They did not swim. They drifted as if remembering how to be bodies. One paused, turning toward her. No weapon. No sound. Just watching. Kaya backed away slowly. She wasn't here to fight. Not yet. But she had her answer. Isser's origin wasn't in the stars or the matron's dogma. It was here beneath rusted mansions and drowned joy. And something wanted him back. She activated her recall node. The current gripped her like a tether. She let it take her. As the reefscape blurred behind her, Kaya whispered a promise into the current. Not to the matrons. Not even to Isser. But to the reef. I remember you. The ascent left Kaya's muscles trembling. Not from exertion, but from the weight of what she'd seen, what she'd touched. Her recall line pulled her fast through the colder currents of the trench wards, reef and ruin disappearing behind her in a blur of green and blue shadow. She didn't let herself look back. She kept her gaze ahead, fixed on the shimmer of the transport bloom tether that would return her to the outer verge. As soon as she breached, the pod locked around her, sluicing away the brine with a hiss. Her suit peeled back, and she stepped into the deck-in chamber, heart still pounding. She didn't speak when the TideGuard interface asked for her report. She bypassed the prompt, muted the node, and walked barefooted toward the chamber's edge where a single pane of obsidian glass overlooked the inner bay. The wreckage lay somewhere beyond that stillness, quiet and coiled with secrets. Kaya knew she couldn't go straight to the elders. Not with this. Not yet. The matrons were already circling Isser like reef hawks over a breach-born pup. She could see it in the way they watched him during drills, how they studied his glyph echoes as if trying to catch a crack in glass. She'd been assigned as his mentor, but no one had asked her opinion. They just expected her to guide the boy into resonance, to ensure he bloomed without deviation. Except Isser was a deviation, and now she knew why. She changed quickly, donning the rust-colored robes of her house. No sigils, no armoring, just the fabric that marked her as a child of House Nemean, keepers of memory and shoreline law. But today the title felt hollow. What laws could govern the sea's memory? What traditions survived in a reef built from stolen cities? Kaya made her way down the vine-latticed corridors of the midspire, toward the Hall of Shells. Not the central chamber. Not the archive. The place beneath it, where records weren't etched but sung. The cantor chamber was cold. Not in temperature but in tone. The air had a density to it, filled with old sound that hadn't quite died. The shells lining the walls weren't decorative. They were storage. Each one holding a resonance imprint, voices, confessions, whispers recorded by the earliest matrons when the sea still boiled with war. Kaya selected a shell from the deepest shelf. Obsidian-streaked, its mouth sealed in silver wire. She breathed on it. The wire uncoiled. A voice spilled out, female, aged and thunder-worn. We thought we were saving them. We took their cities so they wouldn't be burned. But the surface lied. They gave us maps with blood under the ink. We were pawns. Our pact was a cage. And now the reef dreams in their names. The voice faltered, crackled, then fell silent. Kaya stared at the shell in her hands, then placed it gently in the offering basin. She wasn't sure what disturbed her more, the words or how closely they matched what she'd already begun to suspect. If this was true, if the matrons had forged the pact knowing the truth, then everything, Isser's adoption, his mutation, his resonance, it all pointed back to the same wound. Back in the training quarters, Isser sat cross-legged on a resonance ring, palms turned up, glyph light curling around his fingertips like lazy smoke. He didn't notice her at first. He was humming. Not a training chant. A lullaby. Old. One she hadn't heard since she was small. His eyes were closed, lips moving slightly. When he did open them, he looked right through her. I know where I'm from, he said, voice soft. The reef told me. Kaya stepped into the light of the ring, letting her shadow fall across the pattern. It told me too, she said, sitting across from him. You were born in the wreckage. Isser nodded slowly. But I wasn't alone. He tapped the center of his wrist where the skin shimmered faintly, not with ink but with coral glow. There were others. Children like me. Not drowned. Not dead. Just still singing. Kaya's breath caught. You've heard the choir. Isser's eyes sharpened. No. They heard me. Kaya stood, her voice tight. We need to go back. He tilted his head. Now. No. But soon. The matrons won't allow it. And they'll bury the truth before they admit what they did. Isser rose, the resonance fading from his skin. Then we don't tell them. Not yet. She nodded. She wasn't ready to burn bridges. But she would dive again. Not alone. And not as a scout. This time as a daughter of the drowned cities. As a keeper of stolen memory. She left the training ring with her fists clenched. The wreckage wasn't just a grave. It was a mouth. And it had begun to sing. The days that followed were veiled in silence. Not the kind that settles from peace, but the kind that hums beneath your skin like a tremor waiting to break. Kaya went through the motions, oversaw tide drills, corrected Isser's form during pulse weaving, responded to the occasional summons from the lesser matrons. But all the while, her thoughts pulled back toward the reefscape. Toward the rusted mansions with their collapsed balconies. Toward the wrought iron balconies choked in seaweed. The grand staircases submerged in coral-blistered silence. She saw ballroom chandeliers torn half loose, swaying like kelp in slow-motion dreams, broken piano wires shimmering like spines from their wooden cage. These weren't just remnants, they were elegies. And someone had orchestrated their descent. The sea had not claimed them by accident. She accessed what she could of the archived maps, cross-referencing pre-fall surface cartography with what little remained of early Pact-era dive records. Most of them were scrubbed. The matrons didn't want anyone tracing the coral fields back to their surface origins, least of all the apprentices who might question the foundation of their own refuge. But Kaya had grown up watching how the matrons moved, what they said versus what they permitted to go unspoken. And in that silence she found a way in. She learned to parse what wasn't there. The black towns that vanished just before the first reef colonies were sanctioned. Entire communities with civic halls, libraries, orchestras, and solar-powered rail loops, gone, with no record but their echoing shapes embedded in reef glass. On her next sanctioned dive she brought Isser with her. Not as a novice but as a twin current, someone whose resonance could meet hers and complete it. The wreckage welcomed him. The glyph lights flowed more easily when his feet touched the ocean floor. Where her presence was met with caution, his was met with murmurs, long spectral notes that curled around his ears like voices in prayer. They passed a sunken garden that had once been a rooftop, vines wrapped around marble busts of forgotten teachers, fish darting between plaques etched with names no longer listed in surface census archives. Isser brushed a hand against a stone pedestal, and the choral sang in a frequency Kaya couldn't fully hear, until her pulse aligned with his and for a brief moment, she could see the reef's memory. A parade, all black faces, laughter, banners stitched with joy, a festival swallowed mid-breath. She surfaced shaken but resolute. The reef wasn't merely haunted. It was waiting to be remembered.
Chapter 5. The Boy Who Fell Twice.
Chapter Separator. He came to beneath the reef's shadow, his mouth filled with salt and silence. The current had still just enough to cradle him in a bed of crushed pearl and moss-draped pylons, the kind that used to hold cities above the surfline before the seas claimed their inheritance. His limbs felt too long, too light. His skin raw where the brine had kissed it like acid. Breath came ragged, confused. The last thing he remembered before the fall, before the breach, was a voice shouting not his name, but a warning in a language he'd never learned and somehow still understood. His chest rose, fell, seized. The gills at his neck fluttered once, then closed. Human breath returned, reluctant. Kaya and Isser had found him in a tidal alcove between the sunken amphitheater and the broken spinal causeway, half curled around himself like something dropped, not born. He didn't speak at first. Not in words. But when Kaya reached for his arm to stabilize his tremors, the glyph shimmered to life. A sigil seared across his forearm, not inked but fused, like living circuitry grafted into skin. Black at first, then violet. And below it, a triple-ring seal bearing unmistakable script, Sanctum Vaticana. Kaya recoiled, not from fear but from knowledge. The Vatican hadn't sent emissaries in over a generation. Not openly. Their magisters operated from behind proxies, their rites forbidden this deep into pact-held waters. Isser stared at the glyph like he'd seen it once in a dream or a fever. It pulsed faintly like a second heart. Kaya steadied herself, locking eyes with the boy. "What are you?" His mouth twitched. "I don't know anymore." The voice cracked, hoarse from swallowed tide. "But I remember falling. Twice." He spoke of the surface briefly, brokenly. Not the real surface, but a cloister above the Vatican line, near the last of the consecrated altars. He'd been taken in as a ward-fed doctrine, taught how to channel light through tongue and marrow. His fall had not been physical, at least not at first. It had been theological. He'd questioned a passage, then a practice. He'd refused the baptism of iron. The second fall came when they cast him into the surf from the clouds. Kaya stared at him, at the glyph and the seal and the impossible survival. No one survived the Vatican's purged depths. No one came back breathing, let alone changed. But this boy, barely older than Isser, had emerged not just alive but marked, touched, claimed. And yet the claim did not hold him fully. His veins shimmered now with low light, something older than gospel. Something coral-blooded. Something reef-born. He was the boy who fell twice, but what had risen in his place was something else entirely. They brought him back along the low ruins, weaving through half-toppled mosaics and the ribs of flooded cathedrals where fish darted through once sacred arches. The sea held memory differently here. It did not forgive. Kaya kept her eyes on the boy, watching the way he moved, too fluid, too silent, as if the water was part of him now, not obstacle but extension. Isser said little, trailing behind like a ghost still learning its edges. He didn't trust the boy. Not entirely. But trust was a luxury none of them could afford anymore. The sun broke faintly through the surface far above, painting fractured light across the reefscape and glinting off the boy's skin where the glyph shimmered like old tech waking. He hadn't said his name yet. Kaya hadn't asked. Names had power. And something about this one, this Vatican-washed castaway who breathed both water and air, told her that whatever name he'd carried before, it might not fit anymore. He touched a wall as they passed, and barnacles bloomed beneath his fingers like he'd summoned them. Coral hardened along the seams of his palm, then retracted. It was unintentional, and that frightened her more. Power without control. Baptism without anchor. And always the glyph, pulsing like a wound that had learned to beat. They reached the outpost shell by nightfall, the ragged hull that served as home for now. Kaya prepared the salt screen while Isser went to fetch the bone lanterns. The boy, still silent, stood before the cracked mirror by the entry where seawater had stained the reflection green. He stared not at his face, but at the lines of the sigil. Vatican sealed. But sealed against what? Against escape? Against awakening? Against himself? Later, over dried kelp and filtered rain broth, he spoke again. His voice was stronger now and slower. They tried to sink me. Thought the ocean would eat me whole. He glanced down at his hands flexing. But something else did first. Kaya leaned forward. What do you mean? He met her gaze unflinching. There's something in the deep. Below even the vault lines. Below the old thermal scars. It calls. He swallowed. It marked me. Or maybe I marked it. Isser shook his head, rubbing a smudge off his blade. You're delirious. Deep void madness. Happens to drifters. Seen it before. But Kaya wasn't so sure. She'd heard whispers from the divers, stories passed down by exiles and surface strays. Rumors of an intelligence in the trench beyond memory, older than land gods and sea law, sealed when the world still breathed fire. And now this boy had fallen through the roof of doctrine and come up with a sigil the church had stopped using after the burning Concord. No one should have known that glyph. No one but the cardinal arcanes themselves. And even then never burned into flesh. Never alive. You should have drowned, Kaya said finally, voice quiet. You shouldn't be here. The boy nodded. I know. He unwrapped his arm slowly, revealing more of the seal. Beneath it, bone had begun to surface, just a trace, almost like armor forming beneath skin. But I didn't. And now I dream in symbols I've never seen, and I bleed ink that smells like brine and incense. The water outside groaned as the tide shifted. Something old stirred in the shallows. And far off in the reef, the broken bells of the sunken cathedral began to toll. They didn't sleep that night. Not properly. Kaya kept the bone lantern lit and her spear close, the sea pressing against the walls like breath held too long. The boy didn't rest either. He sat upright, knees drawn, eyes glazed with something distant. Not fear exactly. Not pain. It was recognition, maybe. As if he was beginning to remember something he was never supposed to survive. Isser muttered to himself in a corner, sharpening metal that would never shine. The glyph on the boy's forearm had changed. Not grown, shifted. The geometry twisted slightly, lines no longer purely ecclesiastical but bearing elements of reef logic, an architecture too wild to be entirely drawn by hand. It now pulsed in rhythm with the tides. Kaya didn't mention it. She simply stared at the way his skin hummed when the glyph blinked, like a silent sonar that only the old gods could hear. When dawn bled through the upper currents, a cold gray light touched the wreckage beyond the reef walls. The boy stood and moved toward the opening, barefoot and careful, like he didn't yet trust the ground to hold him. Kaya followed. The reefscape stretched wide and brutal. Towers split in half by salt. Domes from vanished townships covered in seaweed and barnacles. Faded murals of black saints, their eyes long since eaten out by fish. These were remnants of the World Fair's stolen wonders, entire neighborhoods ripped from black earth and tossed into the ocean like failed prayers. There, a rusted carousel with gold horses locked mid-gallop. There, a broken aqueduct once lined with obsidian tiles that glowed with memory. The boy stepped into it all like he belonged, like he'd been born in this graveyard of brilliance. This place, he whispered, remembers me. Kai almost asked how. But the words caught in her throat when he walked beneath the shattered colonnade of what had once been a library, and every rusted tablet along the wall turned toward him. Not mechanically, no gears, no servos. Just slowly, as if waking from centuries of sleep. Isser caught up then, out of breath and angry. He's triggering the warded relics. These ruins are supposed to be inert. How is he interfacing without a glyph key? The boy turned, the corners of his mouth twitching, not a smile. A knowing. Because I'm not interfacing, he said softly. I'm resonating. That was the word that stayed with Kaya. Long after the reef began to grow quiet again, after they moved deeper into the sunken ruins, past relic markers and the hollow bones of saints carved into the sand. Resonating. Like he was a tuning fork struck by a god no one prayed to anymore. Beneath the waves, silence gathered. But deeper still, beyond the architecture of sunken black towns, beyond the colonial scars rusted into steel, there was something older. Watching. Listening. The boy stopped near the trench's edge, where no lights reached and no divers dared. They called it Vatican sealed, he said without turning. But it was never the church that sealed it. Kaya exhaled slowly. Then who? He looked over his shoulder, eyes reflecting the dim glint of the lantern. Us, he said. We did. And before she could ask what he meant, he stepped toward the drop, letting the cold pressure kiss his feet. Not diving. Not falling. Simply returning. Kaya moved to stop him, but the water thickened around her ankles, resistant like something sentient, warning her. Not forbidding, just offering a choice. Isser cursed in a whisper behind her, his breath fogging up the edges of his rebreather mask. That trench isn't mapped. Nothing comes back from it, not even sound. But the boy kept moving, toes slipping over the black lip of the abyss as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. Then he paused. It doesn't want me dead, he said. It remembers when I was part of it. Kaya couldn't decide if he was mad, or if madness was just another name for remembering too much. The glyph on his forearm glowed stronger now, lighting up the ridges of scar tissue and old bite marks, human teeth. Ritual, not accident. She stepped closer. If it remembers you, then it might remember who you were. You said we sealed it. What did we seal? The boy tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something deep beneath the continental shelf, and answered without looking at her. A name. A hunger. A design language so old even the stars won't say it aloud. The way he spoke, softly, precisely, like someone reciting a prayer from the inside of a coffin, made Kaya's skin prickle. The Vatican only stamped the outer script. The rest was carved in blood. The vein letters. The kind we wrote before the sea turned against us. Isser swore again, louder this time. He's not just branded, Kaya. That glyph isn't passive. It's absorbing residual field logic. It's bleeding through our wards. He raised his relic rifle, unsure whether he meant to threaten or protect, and Kaya placed her hand on the barrel, lowering it gently. He doesn't know what he is yet, she murmured. And we'll never find out if we kill him first. The boy blinked, slow and ancient. You're both wrong, he said. I know what I am. I just haven't decided if it's a curse or an inheritance. He pressed one hand to his chest then, and the glyph flared violently, casting a sharp red corona over the reef's cape. Shapes stirred in the dark beyond the trench, half-visible things rippling like flagellum, too symmetrical to be fish and too fast to be machines. The water's density changed again, thicker now, bearing weight. From somewhere below a voice unfurled. Not spoken, not heard. Felt. Felt in the marrow, the teeth, the spine. Not language but design. As if a cathedral had just looked back. Kaya gripped her spear tighter. The boy looked into the dark and whispered, It's waking up.
Chapter 6. The Red Cross Army marches still.
Chapter Separator. Kaya stood knee-deep in a garden of shattered helmets and rib-warped armor. The seabed littered with relics from a war never officially recorded. The reef had grown through the corpses, winding coral through eye sockets, blooming anemones inside rusted rifles. Yet even now, centuries drowned, their insignia still burned red beneath the oxidized ruin. The cross within the shield, a symbol once meant to heal that had long since become the brand of imperial vengeance. The Red Cross Army, she mouthed to herself, tasting the ash memory of its name. Not an army of nurses as the textbooks lied, not a rescue mission in uniform. These had been child soldiers in hospice white, trained not to treat wounds but to cleanse sights. Crusaders with syringes full of entropy. The reef whispered as she moved, current brushing across her ears like breath. Images flickered behind her eyes, flashes, not dreams. A boy no older than 13 saluting in the snow, blood crusted on his sleeves. Another tying prayer cloths to a bomb rigged inside a dam valve. The Vatican seal on the crate. The sound of a whistle that was not for sports or drills but detonation. She touched a relic shell casing embedded in the coral and the world inverted. Salt in her throat, static in her teeth. A memory not her own surged forward. She saw a formation of boys in red and white scarves marching under a sky bruised with storm. Their hands carried hymnals and wires, and their badges bore the name Ex Umbra Sanctum, from the shadows holy. In the vision they moved like sleepwalkers through flooded black towns, placing holy charges under dams and levees, baptizing the water with quiet, practiced prayers. A Vatican knight stood behind them, visor lowered, reciting coordinates. This city resists the faith. Let the flood carry away their heresy. The boys nodded, not with joy or malice, but with the mechanical obedience of those who'd never been allowed to think otherwise. Kaya broke from the vision, panting. Isser gripped her shoulder, grounding her, but even he looked pale beneath his visor. "You saw them too?" she asked. He nodded, grim. "Scout commanders. Jesuit-trained. They rewrote the Boy Scout code into martyr doctrine. They weren't just building character. They were building sanctified demolition crews." She wiped blood from her nose. "And now their ghosts are still here, repeating the pattern." Isser gestured toward the ocean trench behind them. "We always assumed the sea swallowed them. But what if it remembers? What if the Red Cross Army marches still, not in flesh but in memory? Not in uniforms but in the code they left behind. Not soldiers anymore, but sacraments." Kaya forced herself to steady her breathing, the salty air thick with the decay of memories half buried in the reefs. The water around her shimmered with fragmented light, flickering through the coral ruins like the fading pulse of a dying star. The relics beneath the waves were not just wreckage, they were time capsules, caught between what had been and what could never be forgotten. Each rusted helmet, each corroded rifle was a ghost's fingerprint, proof that the Red Cross Army's reach had never truly ended. Her fingers brushed the chipped emblem on a mangled breastplate, the cross within the shield, cracked but unyielding. The emblem was stained with centuries of salt and blood, an enduring scar on history's skin. "We need to know what they did here," Kaya whispered, more to herself than to Isser, who was already pulling out a small device from his pack. The artifact's screen flickered to life, scanning the area with a low hum. The device had been a gift from the old scholars, an echo detector, designed to pick up residual psychic imprints embedded in the environment. "If these ghosts still march," Kaya said, "then maybe they left something behind, something the sea didn't swallow." The device pulsed faintly, then emitted a sharp signal. Kaya's heart thudded as a wave of images surged into her mind. She saw them again, the boys no older than children, but eyes hardened like steel, hands steady as they wired explosives beneath massive dam gates. Their uniforms were immaculate, white with red accents like a blood-stained flag, and the Vatican seal gleamed like a promise branded on their arms. The boys moved with eerie precision, placing charges at strategic points meant to cripple entire cities. In her vision, the water began to rise, swallowing streets, homes, and memories. She felt the cold shock of drowning, the desperate fight for air, the cries of those left behind. But the boys marched on, silent soldiers of a dark covenant, carrying out orders that blurred the line between salvation and annihilation. "They believed it was divine will," Isser said softly, breaking the silence. A cleansing flood ordained by holy decree. Kaya shivered, the weight of those lost souls pressing down on her. The Red Cross Army was more than myth. It was a living scar on the world, its legacy carried by the waters that still claimed the rusted mansions and shattered castles of forgotten black towns. She glanced toward the horizon, where the sun struggled to pierce the gathering clouds. If they were children once, she murmured, then what happened to them? Where are they now? Isser's eyes darkened beneath his visor. Some say they were swallowed by the sea. Others whisper they were taken deeper, transformed into something else. Guardians, maybe. Or monsters. The thought sent a chill through her veins. And the boy we found? The one with the Vatican seal burned onto his skin? Kaya asked, her voice barely a breath. Isser nodded grimly. He's a relic of that same covenant. Half drowned, half changed, like a bridge between past and present. A living echo of the Red Cross Army's darkest mission. The reefscape around them seemed to pulse with life and death intertwined, a monument to a war fought in silence beneath the waves. Kaya's gaze fell on a shattered statue, half covered in coral, depicting a figure with outstretched arms and eyes closed in prayer. The inscription was worn away, but she felt the weight of its meaning. Hope twisted into tragedy. She knelt beside it, tracing the rough edges with trembling fingers. These towns were more than battlegrounds, she said. They were homes. Places where people lived, loved, and died. The sea had taken everything, leaving only whispers and rust. Yet the echoes of the Red Cross Army still marched through the currents, a relentless hymn of obedience and sacrifice. Kaya knew that uncovering their secrets meant facing not only the horrors of the past, but the shadows still creeping into the present. Isser's voice pulled her back from the edge of the abyss. There's more beneath the surface. The Vatican didn't just send soldiers, they sent priests, scientists, and technicians. They weaponized faith and technology together. He pointed toward a submerged structure looming in the distance, half collapsed but unmistakably engineered. That was a command center. The heart of their operation. Kaya's resolve hardened. Then that's where we go. If the past still lives there, it might hold the key to stopping the march. The water grew colder as they prepared to dive deeper, the reefscape swallowing them into its haunted embrace. Beneath the waves, the ghosts of the Red Cross Army waited, silent, unyielding, and marching still. The descent into the submerged command center was slow and deliberate. Kaya's lungs burned beneath her mask, the familiar sting a reminder of life clinging against suffocation. The water pressed in around her like a cold shroud, muffling sound and distorting light into eerie ribbons that danced across the cracked metal walls. Around them, remnants of long-forgotten machinery lay scattered, broken consoles, shattered monitors frozen on static, cables like tangled serpents weaving through the debris. Isser's device hummed softly in her hand, casting a pale glow that revealed faded glyphs etched deep into the corroded steel. These were Vatican markings, sigils of control, protection, and binding. A language of power meant to command the unseen. Kaya reached out, tracing one of the symbols with a gloved finger, feeling the sharp edges beneath the algae. This place wasn't just a relic. It was a tomb, sealed by faith and fear, its secrets waiting beneath layers of rust and silence. A sudden flicker on one of the intact screens startled her, a pulse of light breaking the stillness like a heartbeat. The display blinked erratically before stabilizing into a grainy map of waterways and dams, glowing red at several points of interest. Look at this, Isser murmured. Coordinates. Targets. Kaya's eyes narrowed. The bombs had been planned with surgical precision, designed to devastate entire watersheds and flood the black towns into oblivion. The Red Cross Army hadn't just marched. They had orchestrated a campaign of destruction masked as salvation. She swallowed hard, imagining the rivers overflowing, sweeping away homes and memories alike. The images replayed in her mind. Children with cold eyes wiring explosives, priests invoking divine wrath, and the boy with the Vatican seal, caught between innocence and damnation. We have to find out who gave these orders, Kaya said. And why? Isser tapped a sequence on his wrist console, and the map zoomed into a hidden sublevel beneath the command center. The entry was buried beneath collapsed beams and thick coral, but the text still recognized the ancient access codes. This level, Isser explained, was used for experiments, bioengineering, mind control, the sort of things that warp reality. Kaya's stomach clenched. The boy's half-changed state wasn't a coincidence. It was the result of Vatican intervention, a twisted fusion of science and faith wielded as weapons. If they're still doing this, she whispered, then no one is safe. They pried open a hatch sealed tight for centuries, the metal groaning like a beast disturbed. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of brine and chemical residue. Broken vials and shattered equipment littered the floor, traces of faded blood marking the walls. Kaya crouched beside a scorched table where faded documents lay half-melted but legible, notes on experiments to graft religious symbolism onto flesh, attempts to burn faith into skin like a brand, much like the boy's glyph. The Vatican wasn't merely controlling soldiers. It was creating something new, something terrifying. Hours passed as Kaya and Isser pieced together the fragments of this submerged nightmare. The Red Cross Army was only the beginning, a front for a deeper agenda that fused spiritual warfare with technological dominance. The boy was both victim and weapon, a living testament to the sins buried beneath the waves. Yet as they prepared to leave the wreckage, Kaya felt an ominous presence, a ripple in the water, a faint pulse beneath her feet. The ghosts of the Red Cross Army were not just memories. They were watchers, guardians of secrets that refused to die. She looked to Isser, her voice steady despite the chill creeping down her spine. We need to warn the others. The war beneath the waves is far from over. As they ascended, the reefscape seemed to close behind them, swallowing the echoes of the past while casting new shadows on the future. Back on the surface, the world felt brittle, like a cracked mirror reflecting fractured truths. Kaya's mind raced with questions, with visions of the boy's burning glyph and the silent march of the Red Cross Army. Who had sent the Boy Scouts on those deadly missions? What was the Vatican's true purpose in wielding such dark power? And most pressing of all, could they stop the tide before it swept everything away? The ocean breeze tugged at her hair, carrying salt and sorrow, but also a flicker of hope. Somewhere beneath the wreckage lay answers, waiting to be uncovered. The Red Cross Army might march still, but Kaya was determined to be the voice that finally stopped their relentless hymn.
Chapter 7. Floodgate Sigils.
Chapter Separator. Kaya stood at the edge of the crumbling seawall, the salty wind whipping her hair as she stared down into the murky depths where the floodgates lay buried beneath decades of silt and coral. The sigils, ancient symbols etched into the stonework of the dams, glowed faintly beneath the water's surface, pulsing with a restless energy that sent shivers through her spine. These were no ordinary floodgates. They were seals, wards woven from lost knowledge, meant to hold back not just water, but something far darker lurking beneath the ocean's weight. The Red Cross Army had known this, had sought to break them, to unleash the chaos held at bay for centuries. Isser approached quietly, his eyes scanning the ruined infrastructure. Each sigil corresponds to a memory, he said softly. A fragment of history, a shard of power. Breaking one weakens the whole. Kaya nodded, her gaze fixed on the deepest sigil, a complex weave of crosses and spirals that seemed to throb with life. We have to find the source, she said, before they destroy the last line of defense. Together they dove beneath the waves, into the tangled maze of broken masonry and coral-encrusted statues, where the sigils awaited their fate, and the truth buried in their glow. Kaya's lungs burned as she plunged deeper beneath the churning surface, the cold water squeezing at her chest like iron bands. Around her, the skeletal remains of the dam stretched out in grotesque arches and fractured pillars, some still clutching remnants of rusted iron gates, now eaten away by salt and time. The sigils, etched into the very bones of this drowned fortress, glimmered faintly with an eerie, otherworldly light. Their glow refracted through the water in shimmering, fractured patterns, casting spectral shadows that danced across the jagged ruins. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed like a forgotten relic, yet to Kaya, these were ancient seals of unimaginable power, each a lock holding back a flood far worse than water. Isser moved beside her, graceful and silent, his hand brushing the surface of a spiraled symbol carved into a fallen archway. The sigils aren't merely protective, he whispered, voice muffled by the water and his own breath. They are warnings and prisons. His eyes, sharp and calculating, traced the faint luminescence as it pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the algae and coral. Legends say these were crafted by the last black alchemists of Vathlo Island. Their magic was tied to the ocean's soul, binding spirits, wrathful and ancient, beneath these waters. Kaya nodded, her mind racing. The Red Cross Army's sabotage had been more than just a calculated attack on infrastructure. It was a calculated assault on something far deeper, something entwined with the very survival of their people. The boy's glyph, the Vatican-sealed mark, now seemed even more significant. What force had the Vatican feared so much that they would attempt to shatter these seals, unravel the wards that kept the ocean's fury contained? And why use children like the Boy Scouts as unwitting agents of destruction? As she reached the largest sigil, a vast latticework of crosses interwoven with twisted spirals and runes, Kaya ran her fingers over its jagged edges. The energy thrummed beneath her touch, warm and alive, as if the stone itself breathed. "This one feels different," she murmured. "Like it's still holding something, or someone." Her gaze flicked to Isser, who met her eyes with a grim expression. "If we break this seal," he said carefully, "whatever it holds could be unleashed." "But if we don't understand it," Kaya countered, "we risk losing everything anyway." They surfaced briefly to catch their breaths, the salt air filling Kaya's lungs with a harsh bite. Above, the world seemed calm, but beneath, the water held secrets and dangers, an unseen war waged in silence. Isser pointed toward a tangle of coral-covered ruins shaped like a fortress's remains. "The archives," he said. "There's a submerged library beneath that spire. Records, alchemical texts, anything that might explain the sigil's purpose." They swam toward the ruined tower, currents tugging at their limbs as they navigated through labyrinthine corridors of broken stone and coral pillars. The water around them thickened with plankton, glowing faintly under the sigil's light, creating an almost dreamlike haze. Kaya felt a growing weight in her chest, the pressure of history pressing down. These ruins were once a proud city, a bastion of black Kryptonian civilization, before it had been claimed by the ocean and forgotten by most. Inside the flooded chamber of the tower, they found shelves still intact, though waterlogged and decayed. Scrolls sealed in waterproof cases floated in the water, their ancient inks faded but legible to those who knew the languages. Isser pulled out a brittle manuscript, the cover embossed with the same cross-spiral sigils they had seen on the floodgates. "This is it," he said. "The Codex of the Floodgate Sigils." Kaya's fingers trembled as she opened the manuscript, the pages whispering in the currents. The text spoke of a time when the Black Kryptonians had used alchemy to harness the ocean's spirit, a powerful force called the Leviathan's Heart, a living core buried beneath Vathlo's reefs. The floodgates were more than mechanical barriers, they were magical wards, designed to seal the Leviathan's power beneath the sea, preventing it from overwhelming the land. "The sigils are keys," Kaya realized aloud. "Keys to keeping the Leviathan asleep." Isser nodded slowly. "But the Red Cross Army and their Vatican handlers are destroying the sigils to awaken it. They want to wield its power, or they want to drown us all." His voice was barely a whisper, heavy with dread. The manuscript detailed the process of crafting the sigils, a sacred rite involving blood, elemental fire, and the invocation of ancestral spirits. It described how breaking one sigil would weaken the network, causing the ocean to rise, flooding the coast and swallowing the cities, washing away entire histories in a tidal wave of destruction and erasure. Kaya's mind flashed back to the reefscape of rusted mansions and torn castles she had seen, the drowned relics of black towns swept away beneath the waves. Each ruin was a casualty of the gradual breaking of the floodgates, a scar in the ocean's face. "We have to stop them," she said fiercely. "We have to protect the remaining sigils and we have to find the boy. He's somehow connected to this. The Vatican mark burned on his skin. It can't be a coincidence." Isser frowned. "That glyph is a seal too, one meant to bind and control. The Vatican's magic is a twisted reflection of ours, a corruption of ancient rites. The boy carries a curse or maybe a key." Kaya clenched her fists, feeling the weight of the fight ahead. The tides were turning, the ocean's hunger growing. If they failed, the flood would not just wash away their homes, but their very existence. "We'll need allies," she said quietly. "Old ones who still remember the old magics. Those who walk the reef and speak with the ocean's voice." Isar's eyes gleamed with resolve. "Then we start there." Together, they rose from the water and looked back at the flooded ruins, the faint glow of the sigils fading with the sun's descent. The war beneath the waves was only beginning, and Kaya knew the battle for their future would be fought not just on land, but in the depths of history and magic itself. The sun slipped lower, bleeding molten gold across the horizon, and the chill of the encroaching night seeped into Kaya's bones. Yet, the fire burning inside her refused to waver. The manuscript's words echoed in her mind, the Leviathan's heart, a primal force tethered beneath the reefs, bound by sigils crafted with blood and ancient fire. These floodgates weren't mere structures. They were living wards, pulsing with ancestral power that kept the ocean's wrath chained and silent. She could almost hear the distant song of the sea, a mournful hymn that spoke of old bargains and broken promises. Isar broke the silence. "We've barely scratched the surface. The Codex mentions rites and rituals, sacrifices to bind the Leviathan's power. They say the sigils respond to bloodlines, to the touch of those descended from the original alchemists. Without the rightful heirs, the wards weaken." Kaya swallowed hard. "Which means we're running out of time." The boy. He might be one of those heirs, or something twisted by the Vatican's dark seals. Either way, he's the key, and someone's hunting him to either control or destroy him. Isar nodded grimly, sliding the manuscript into a waterproof satchel. If the Vatican's agents are willing to bomb dams and tear down these ancient wards, what are they planning to unleash? A flood, yes, but also chaos, death, and maybe something even worse. Kaya's gaze drifted back to the reefscape, where the skeletal remains of rusted mansions and castles, once proud monuments to black towns, lay submerged, conquered by the ocean's slow, relentless advance. Each ruin was a testament to what happened when the floodgates failed, a monument to loss, and a warning to those still above the waves. "We need to understand how these floodgates are connected to the land," Kaya said, voice low. "If breaking them causes the ocean to rise, then maybe there's a way to reverse it, to repair the sigils, or at least delay the inevitable." Isar's eyes glittered with a mixture of hope and skepticism. The texts mention a place called the Well of Echoes, a hidden chamber where the first floodgate was sealed. It's said to be guarded by ancestral spirits, keepers who hold the knowledge of renewal. Kaya's heart quickened. Then that's where we go next. If we can find the Well of Echoes, maybe we can learn how to mend the sigils before the whole reefscape turns to ruin. As they prepared to leave the ruins, a sudden ripple disturbed the water, subtle but unmistakable. Kaya's head snapped toward the sound. Something was moving beneath the waves, something large and slow. Her pulse quickened. "Did you feel that?" Isar's eyes narrowed. "The Leviathan's heart is stirring. The wards are weakening faster than we thought." The tension tightened around them like a vice. The ocean, which had always been a source of life and sustenance for their people, now threatened to become their undoing. Kaya wondered if the boy, with his Vatican-sealed glyph, carried not just a curse but a chance, a sliver of salvation woven into his flesh. As they climbed from the water and made their way back toward the shore, Kaya's mind spun with fragments of the Codex. The floodgates had been a pact between the black Kryptonian alchemists and the ocean itself, a covenant forged in blood and spirit to protect their civilization. But pacts she knew were fragile. They could be broken, twisted, corrupted. And once broken, there was no telling what fury the sea might unleash. Isar broke her reverie. "We should seek out Elder Mirren," he said. "She's one of the last surviving alchemists who remembers the old ways. If anyone can guide us to the Well of Echoes and help us understand the true power of the sigils, it's her." Kaya hesitated, the weight of the journey ahead settling heavily on her shoulders. The Elder's sanctuary lay deep within the mainland's jungle, a place whispered of in legend and shadow. It was a pilgrimage fraught with danger, but it was their only hope. "Then we move at first light," Kaya said, determination hardening her voice. "We'll find the Well of Echoes, and we'll stop this flood before it drowns everything we've ever known. That night, beneath a canopy of stars, Kaya lay awake, the manuscript secrets burning behind her eyes. The boy's image haunted her thoughts, half drowned, half changed, marked by the Vatican's curse yet holding an undeniable spark of power. What had he survived? What had been done to him? And what role would he play in the storm gathering on the horizon? The ocean song drifted through the open window, a haunting melody that mingled with the rustling leaves. It was a call, a warning, and a promise all at once. The floodgates were failing. The Leviathan stirred. And the tide of fate was rising fast. Tomorrow, Kaya thought, the real battle would begin.
Chapter 8. The Sable Choir.
Chapter Separator. The air was thick with the scent of rain and salt as Kaya made her way toward the heart of Vathlo Island's oldest quarter, a place whispered about in half-forgotten legends and hushed warnings, the district known only as the Sable Choir. It was a name that echoed through the crooked alleys and crumbling stone steps like a funeral dirge, a reminder of voices lost and promises broken beneath the oppressive canopy of night. Here the shadows clung like living things, twisting and weaving through the skeletal remains of buildings whose once proud facades had long since been devoured by time and neglect. The narrow streets were slick with moss and algae, and the faint luminescence of bioluminescent fungi glimmered faintly beneath shattered windows, casting eerie halos of light over cracked cobblestones slick with damp. Kaya's footsteps echoed softly, her presence swallowed by the dense silence, broken only by the distant cry of a lone nightbird. This was the domain of the Sable Choir, a clandestine collective of voices said to be neither wholly living nor fully dead, an eternal assembly whose songs could sway fate and unravel the fabric of the known world. The choir was not a gathering of singers but a brotherhood of survivors and exiles bound by a shared curse, each marked by the darkness that clung to the edges of Vathlo's hidden history. Their names were lost, their identities erased, their souls caught in the liminal space between memory and oblivion. Some claimed they were the last living remnant of a vanished people. Others whispered of them as spirits bound by old blood oaths to guard secrets too terrible to utter aloud. To the common folk, the Sable Choir was a myth, a specter conjured to scare children and silence the curious. But Kaya knew better. She had seen their sigils etched in forgotten corners, heard their coded whispers carried on the wind, and felt the pull of their power like a current beneath her skin. She moved deeper into the quarter, past collapsed doorways draped in curtains of thick black ivy, and into a courtyard where a solitary tree twisted skyward, its bark as dark as obsidian, its branches reaching like skeletal fingers toward the heavy clouds overhead. Beneath it, a circle of stones formed an ancient altar, worn smooth by centuries of rain and ritual. Kaya paused, reaching out to brush her fingers over the cold surface, feeling the faint hum of residual energy thrumming beneath her touch. The altar was a relic from the time before the floodgates, a place where the Sable Choir had once gathered to sing their elegies and bind their fate with song and sacrifice. A sudden shift in the air made her turn sharply. From the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in flowing sable robes, their face obscured by a veil of midnight silk. The stranger's footsteps were soundless, and their presence carried the weight of inevitability. Kaya's hand instinctively moved to the dagger at her hip, but the figure raised a gloved hand in peace. "You walk a dangerous path, Kaya of the Reef's Cape." The voice was low and smooth like velvet sliding over glass. "Few dare to seek the Sable Choir and live to tell the tale." "I don't seek death," Kaya replied evenly, her eyes fixed on the stranger's hidden face. "I seek answers. The floodgates fail. The Leviathan stirs. The boy bears the Vatican's mark. I need to understand the old pacts before all we've known is swallowed by the tide." The figure inclined their head slowly. "Then you understand the weight of what you ask. The Sable Choir's song is not one of hope, but of mourning and warning. To hear it is to invite the shadows into your soul. Are you prepared to pay the price?" Kaya's jaw tightened. "I have no choice." She met the stranger's gaze, dark eyes gleaming with something ancient and unreadable. "If the flood comes, there will be no price too high." The figure stepped closer, and in a voice barely above a whisper, began to chant. The words twisted and curled through the damp air, a litany in a language older than memory. The stones beneath Kaya's feet seemed to pulse, awakening to the song, and the branches of the obsidian tree quivered as if stirred by unseen winds. Kaya felt the world shift, time folding in on itself, the veil between past and present thinning. The courtyard faded into mist, and suddenly she was no longer standing beneath a dead tree, but within a vast cathedral carved from black stone and illuminated by a sickly red glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. The choir was there. Hundreds of figures clad in robes of deepest midnight, faces obscured by shadow and veils, their mouths moving in unison, weaving a haunting melody that echoed through the cathedral's vastness. The song was sorrow and rage, defiance and despair, a sound that clawed at the edges of Kaya's sanity, and yet held her fast with a strange, terrible beauty. She saw visions in the song. Waves rising high enough to swallow mountains, cities drowning beneath oceans of dark water, the Leviathan breaking free from its chains and roaring its fury into the night sky. She saw the boy again, his skin burning with the Vatican's glyph, falling twice into the abyss and rising anew, a fulcrum upon which the fate of worlds might turn. When the song ended, the choir vanished like smoke, leaving Kaya alone in the cathedral's shadowed silence. The figure who had summoned the vision stepped forward once more, their voice now a grave murmur. You have glimpsed what was and what may come. The floodgates are not simply structures of stone and magic. They are living oaths, bound to the blood and song of those who came before. The sable choir is the memory of those oaths, a chorus of souls tasked with guarding their secrets and mourning their loss. Kaya nodded slowly, the weight of the revelation settling deep within her chest. Then I must find the source of their song, the place where the first floodgate was sealed, and where the boy's fate was forged. Only there can I hope to unravel this darkness. The figure's gaze pierced her. Beware, Kaya. The path you walk is a treacherous one. The Vatican's seals are not merely marks but chains forged to bind power that should never be touched. The boy carries both salvation and doom. To follow him is to court madness and death. As the cathedral dissolved, and Kaya found herself once more beneath the obsidian tree, the storm overhead finally broke, rain lashing the world with cold fury. She did not flinch. The sable choir's song lingered in her mind, a melody of shadows and truth that would guide her through the coming storm. She was no longer just a seeker of knowledge but a bearer of a burden that could shape the fate of all who dwelled beneath the waves. The night swallowed her as she stepped back into the twisting alleys of the sable choir, the echoes of ancient voices trailing behind her like ghosts, and the promise of a reckoning that was yet to come. Kaya moved deeper into the labyrinthine streets of the sable choir, the rain now a steady drum against the warped wooden shutters and broken gutters. The weight of the vision still pressed against her chest, a heavy cloak woven from shadows and sorrow. The choir's lament had opened a wound in her mind, and though the city's damp cold seeped into her bones, a fire burned beneath her skin, the relentless need to understand what had been lost, and what might yet be reclaimed. Around her, the fractured remnants of forgotten lives murmured beneath the waves of moss and rust, doorways half swallowed by creeping tidewater, stone archways fractured like broken teeth, and the jagged skeletons of ships stranded long ago, their timbers jutting upward like ribs. This was a place where time did not flow linearly but pooled in stagnant eddies, where past and present collided beneath the relentless crush of oceanic decay. The air carried whispers, faint threads of song that seemed to seep from the cracked masonry itself, as if the stones remembered the choir's ancient hymns. Her footsteps took her to the edge of a ruined pier, where once proud mansions had stood, their foundations now jagged ruins clawing up from the dark water. Kaya knelt to touch the slick surface of a carved relief half submerged in the black tide, a spiral of interlocking sigils, worn by centuries but still faintly glowing beneath her fingers. This was the mark of the choir's binding, a spell woven into stone and sea, meant to contain the power that had spilled before the floodgates. She could feel the pulse of it, a heartbeat trapped beneath layers of salt and stone, trembling with latent energy waiting for release. Above, the storm's fury swelled, lightning fracturing the sky in jagged white veins, illuminating the ghostly outline of a shattered castle beyond the reef, its towers leaning and fractured but still proud against the tide's assault. Kaya's mind flickered back to the boy, the strange glyph burned onto his skin by the Vatican's hand, a seal both imprisoning and empowering. The vision of him falling twice into the abyss haunted her. His body twisted in the depths, drowning and rising, caught between worlds. The choir's song had revealed that his fate was entwined with the floodgates, and now she understood that the seals on his flesh were not merely wards but keys that might unlock salvation or unleash devastation. The thought clawed at her resolve. If the Vatican had marked him, what dark bargains had been struck in shadowed chambers far from these drowned streets? What price had been paid to bind such power? And what forces now sought to claim it? A sudden movement in the water caught her eye. A dark shape slipping beneath the surface, barely visible but unmistakably alive. Kaya's hand tightened on the hilt of her dagger, and she watched as the shadow surfaced. A figure clad in wet, tattered robes, hair slicked back and eyes glinting with wild desperation. The stranger stumbled onto the pier, coughing and gasping for breath, clutching something tightly to their chest. Kaya stepped forward cautiously. "Who are you?" she asked, voice low over the roar of the storm. The figure's eyes locked onto hers with a frantic intensity. "A witness. A survivor," they rasped, voice hoarse but urgent. "They're coming, the ones who seek to shatter the seals, to drown the world anew. The Vatican's hand moves in shadows, but their reach is long. The Red Cross army marches still, and the boy? He is the fulcrum. If he falls, all falls." Kaya's heart thundered. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together in a nightmarish mosaic. The floodgates failing, the boy marked and hunted, the Vatican's secret armies bent on destruction. "What do you know of the choir's song? How do we stop this?" she demanded. The stranger's lips twitched in a grim smile. "The song is a warning, not a weapon. To change the tide, you must find the source, the original sigils carved beneath the first floodgate. There, the boy's destiny will be revealed, and the power to save or destroy will be yours to claim. But beware, the path is lined with betrayal, and not all who sing with the choir are allies." Kaya nodded slowly, steeling herself against the coming storm. She knew her journey was far from over. The sable choir's mournful voices lingered in her ears, a dark symphony that bound her to a fate she could no longer escape. As the stranger disappeared back into the swirling waters, Kaya turned toward the horizon where the shattered city lay half-drowned beneath the rising tide, determined to follow the thread of fate that would lead her to the heart of the floodgates and the secrets buried beneath.
Chapter 9. Memory is a Weapon.
Chapter Separator. The rain had ceased, leaving behind a world washed clean yet heavy with the scent of damp earth and salt. Kaya stood at the edge of the ruins, the remnants of ancient structures jutting out like the bones of a long-dead leviathan. Each stone, each fragment whispered tales of a past deliberately obscured, of histories rewritten by those who feared the power of remembrance. She knew now that memory was not merely a passive recollection but an active force, a weapon wielded by those who dared to challenge the imposed narratives of the present. The boy, whose name still eluded her, had become a symbol of this struggle. His body bore the marks of the Vatican's seals, inscriptions meant to suppress and control, to erase the lineage of knowledge passed down through generations. Yet within him stirred the echoes of forbidden memories, fragments of truths that threatened to unravel the carefully constructed facade of the world above. Kaya had seen it in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, a spark that defied the darkness imposed upon him. As she ventured deeper into the submerged city, guided by the remnants of the sable choir's song, Kaya encountered others who had preserved the old ways in secret. Elders who spoke in hushed tones of the time before the floodgates, of rituals and rites that honored the balance between land and sea. They shared with her the stories etched into their memories, narratives that had survived not through written records, but through the oral traditions passed from one generation to the next. These were the counter-memories, the resistance to the dominant discourse that sought to erase them. Among these elders was Miran, a woman whose eyes held the depth of centuries. She revealed to Kaya the existence of the Mnemosyne Codex, an artifact said to contain the collective memories of their people, safeguarded against the tides of time and oppression. The Codex, hidden within the labyrinthine chambers beneath the city, was protected by sigils that responded only to those who carried the blood and memories of the ancients. Kaya realized that the boy was the key, his very existence a testament to the resilience of their heritage. Determined to retrieve the codex and awaken the truths buried within, Kaya prepared for the journey into the depths. She knew the path would be fraught with dangers, not only from the physical challenges of the submerged ruins, but also from the psychological toll of confronting memories long suppressed. The weapon focus effect, as described in studies of eyewitness testimony, illustrated how attention narrows in the presence of a threat, leading to the loss of peripheral details. Kaya understood that in the face of trauma, memories could become fragmented, distorted, or even erased. Yet, she also knew that by confronting these memories, by embracing the pain and the truth they held, she could reclaim the power that had been stolen from her people. As she descended into the depths, the water enveloped her, a cold embrace that blurred the boundaries between past and present. Visions assaulted her, images of the floodgates breaking, of the Leviathan rising, of the boy's transformation under the Vatican's influence. She saw the faces of those who had resisted, who had fought to preserve their memories against the tide of forgetting. Each vision was a fragment of the larger mosaic, pieces that, when assembled, revealed the true history that had been hidden for so long. In the heart of the submerged city, Kaya found the chamber that housed the Mnemosyne Codex. The sigils glowed faintly, responding to her presence, acknowledging her as a bearer of the collective memory. As she reached out to the codex, a surge of energy coursed through her, and the memories of her ancestors flooded her consciousness. She saw the rituals, the songs, the battles fought to protect their way of life. She felt their hopes, their fears, their unwavering determination to ensure that their stories would not be forgotten. Emerging from the depths, Kaya carried with her not only the codex but also a renewed sense of purpose. She understood now that memory was indeed a weapon, a tool to challenge oppression, to reclaim identity, to resist the erasure imposed by those in power. With the boy by her side, she would awaken the memories within him, unlocking the potential that the Vatican had sought to suppress. Together they would reignite the flame of remembrance, illuminating the path toward liberation and truth. Kaya couldn't recall the precise moment her thoughts began weaponizing themselves. Perhaps it had always been there, latent, like the dormant coils of a snake asleep in the sun, waiting for the right tremor to strike. The deeper she wandered into the ruins of memory, her own and those grafted onto her skin like scars, the more she came to understand. Memory was not history. It was not neutral. It took sides. It buried what it could not reconcile. It bred ghosts. She was surrounded by them now. They rose from fractured pavestones, bloomed from rusted tank shells long lodged in sea silt, sang through broken teeth of drowned bell towers whose clappers no longer moved. The memory of the world was a warpath, and Kaya was merely the vessel chosen to witness it again. What she saw was a red tide of silence where screaming used to be. Streets that once belonged to children now swallowed them in sinkholes of ash. The veil between past and now, illusion and scar, had worn so thin she sometimes found herself speaking to people who hadn't drawn breath in generations. The choir boys in white sashes who still wandered the burned cloisters. The wounded protesters stitched together by moonlight and bitter resolve. Her mind, her eyes, her glyph-blooming palms, none of it could tell her what was real anymore, only what insisted on being remembered. She passed a scorched mural wall where black angels, halos fractured, still reached skyward in a plea for justice denied them even in death. Below them, Latin prayers charred into the cement. Vatican marks. Echoes of sanctified sin. She touched the wall and it pulsed, burning her with its refusal to forget. Names etched in secret script peeled away like scabs. DeAndre Sakina, Dr. Imani Jorel. Not just people, remembrances sealed and hidden, now clawing their way back into the light. And the boy, the one who fell twice, was always just ahead of her, barefoot, waterlogged, voice raw from secrets held too long. He moved like an omen. Kaya couldn't catch him, only trace the paths he left in the fog, the glyph-scorched warnings he etched into every threshold. She knew now that he had seen the dam bombings not as isolated acts but coordinated liturgies, each with ritual intent. The Red Cross Army's march, the Boy Scout saboteurs, the mass drownings they called flood control, all part of a gospel rewritten in blood and oil. But even this was surface memory, fragmentary and failed. The deeper truth rested somewhere beneath, a buried chord vibrating in the marrow of a city that could not die no matter how many times it was washed clean. Varel's, or what was left of it, was a corpse that spoke in dreams. Kaya heard it clearer now, and it told her that the past was not finished with her. Not yet. Not until she wielded it. Not until memory became blade.
Chapter 10. Crescent Fall.
Chapter Separator. The city lay in ruins, a testament to the chaos that had unfolded. Buildings that once touched the sky now crumbled, their skeletal remains casting long shadows over the desolate streets. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and ash, a constant reminder of the fires that had raged unchecked. Kaya moved through the debris with purpose, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of life. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant cries of those still trapped beneath the rubble. She knew that time was of the essence. Every moment wasted meant another life lost. Her thoughts drifted to the boy, his fate uncertain amidst the devastation. She had seen him last at the edge of the city, his figure silhouetted against the flames. He had turned to her, eyes filled with a determination that belied his youth, before disappearing into the inferno. Kaya had tried to follow, but the collapsing structures had forced her back. Now she feared the worst. But giving in to despair was not an option. She pressed on, her resolve stealing with each step. The path ahead was treacherous, littered with obstacles both physical and emotional. Memories of the city's former glory haunted her, each familiar landmark now a twisted caricature of its former self. She recalled the bustling markets, the laughter of children playing in the parks, the vibrant murals that adorned the walls. All gone, consumed by the relentless march of destruction. Yet amidst the despair, there were signs of resilience. Small groups of survivors banded together, offering aid to those in need. Makeshift shelters sprang up in the least damaged areas, providing a semblance of normalcy. Kaya found solace in these acts of kindness, drawing strength from the indomitable spirit of the people. She joined their efforts, using her knowledge and skills to coordinate rescue missions and distribute supplies. Her leadership did not go unnoticed. Many looked to her for guidance, their trust a heavy burden she bore willingly. As days turned into weeks, the city's pulse began to steady. Though the scars of the past remained, a sense of hope emerged from the ashes. Kaya remained vigilant, ever watchful for signs of the boy. Her search led her to the outskirts, where the damage was less severe. There she encountered a group of children, their eyes wide with fear and wonder. Among them was a familiar face, dirt-smudged and weary but unmistakably his. Relief washed over her as she rushed to his side, enveloping him in a protective embrace. He clung to her, the weight of their shared experiences binding them together. In that moment, amidst the ruins of Crescent Fall, they found a glimmer of light in the darkness. The boy's body was lighter than it had any right to be, as if the wreckage he carried within had burned away some vital weight. Kaya held him tighter, not only because she feared he would vanish again, but because something in his stillness spoke of a truth deeper than wounds. His skin was cool but pulsing with a glyph she hadn't seen since the old archive was flooded, a sigil lost to her world's collective forgetting. It burned faintly now along his ribs in red-cast spirals that shimmered in layered script. "The Vatican seal," she whispered, and he nodded barely. He didn't know what it meant, but she did. It was a mark not just of otherworld sanction but of consent. Somewhere a child had been offered, perhaps to end a war or open a gate. But the seal also whispered of betrayals layered like old scripture beneath a church's new paint. "They made you a key," she murmured, brushing ash from his brow. "Or worse, a weapon disguised as prayer." They moved together, she and the boy, toward the relic-sunken wards of Crescent Fall, once a jewel of glyphic artistry and song-glass towers. Now its domes were shattered, refracting only wind and dust. Beneath its broken walkways lay things buried, not just bones but memories. Kaya felt them pressing beneath her feet. The fall wasn't a war, it was a casting down. No one recalled who gave the order, only that when the Red Cross banners appeared and the satellite hymn commands blared across the sky, the city's people began to vanish. Some called it evacuation. Kaya knew better. The survivors were those who drowned slower. The fall was not just a name, it was an ongoing verb. The city was still falling, still caving beneath the weight of centuries denied. As the boy walked beside her, the air shimmered briefly, as if responding to him. His presence seemed to resonate with something in the stone, drawing out memory like salt from old wounds. They passed murals half-collapsed that now stirred into motion, still images reanimating into brief, haunted loops. Children fleeing in stained scout uniforms. Dams bursting where they were meant to hold. Red lace sigils painted over town crests in a mockery of salvation. Kaya stood frozen before one such vision. Her own face, younger, speaking out against the Red Cross before a crowd in Crescent Hall. She remembered that day. She had no memory of it being recorded. The boy reached out and the image dissolved. They sealed the city with memory, he said, voice soft, voice wrong. Each survivor's recall was fragmented, until you. He didn't look at her when he spoke, as if it pained him. You're the breach. You're remembering rethreads the glyphs. Kaya looked down at her hands and saw them stained with language, faint writing that glimmered like nerves beneath the skin. Why me? She asked. He only pointed toward the collapsed heart of Crescent Fall, where the oldest chapel once stood, now a jagged crater swallowing wind. Kaya knew then that the glyphs weren't just records, they were containment. The seal wasn't just about keeping the boy in, it was about keeping something out. Something Crescent Fall had once buried with all the precision and faith of a civilization trying to forget the gods it betrayed. Now the unthreading had begun, and with it, something was waking beneath the stone. Kaya took the boy's hand. Together they stepped into the breach. The wind shifted as Kaya stepped over the fractured helix of the ancient observatory's rim, her boots skimming the chalk-dusted edge of a stairwell that no longer led anywhere. Beneath her the hollow ruin groaned, not from weight but memory. The glass spire that once crowned the dome had collapsed like a telescope crushed in a child's hand, its scattered fragments melted into the obsidian tide that coated the hill. Here, among the star-watching instruments burned and warped, a flood of images surged up from the marrow of the place, and she staggered back as the veil of history parted. They came as afterimages, the flaring shadows of forgotten moments, cloaked figures chanting in time with celestial alignments, small children tracing sigils into stone floors, priests with silver tongues and bloodied palms marking the solstice with chants that caused time to loop in a tight knot around this place. One of the sigils, a crescent embedded with obsidian runes, flared alive across the broken floor beneath her feet, not with light but absence, a curved mouth swallowing memory. She dropped to one knee not from reverence but pain. Her glyph had begun to hum beneath her collarbone, its pattern reacting to the echoes that saturated the air. The boy had called this place a scar on the sky. Now she understood. It was not merely a ruin. It was a gravity well of belief, a wound too deep for stone to forget. And something in that darkness remembered her. She inhaled, and with it came a scent impossible for a shattered decade to retain. Almond oil, rose, ozone just before a controlled storm. Kaya saw them then, an entire battalion of Red Cross storm monks, red-sashed, boots coated in holy clay, marching up the spine of the observatory with relic rifles and seer lanterns. At their head rode a cardinal in exosilk robes, face veiled, arms outstretched in the posture of judgment. The air shimmered where they passed. Each scout bore an ivory banner laced with crescent sigils, mouths open in eternal song. And their eyes, Kaya's breath caught. Every last one of them had crescent pupils, not drawn or branded but grown, as if the moons themselves had left a seed in their souls.
Kaias mind reeled.
The sable choir's visions hadn't warned her of this. These weren't just enforcers. They were fragments of something larger. A choir stitched from memory. A liturgical machine. Her fingers gripped the rim of the sigil, and she leaned close. Under her breath she recited what the boy had whispered back when his voice still held both human and something else. The moon is not an object. It is an instruction. And then she saw the code beneath the sigil, no longer aesthetic, no longer static. Glyphs folding into one another, self-replicating, as if reacting to her presence. This place was rewriting. It was a living archive. She reached for her journal to document the pattern, but her fingers froze. From the east corridor came a sound like bone dragged across salt. Something else had remembered her too. She stood. The sky overhead had darkened to that bruised violet that comes before a false dawn. And with it the air changed. The pressure bent. A shimmer passed over the stairwell, and from the vapor coalesced a being not fully flesh, not fully figment, a walker in half-light. Its robes were tattered, but beneath the veil of static and particle drift, Kaya saw its chest bore the same sigil she now knelt upon. Only its glyph burned inverted. A sickle turned inward. An eclipse devouring itself. The creature turned its head. Mechanically, slowly, as if unused to motion. Its mouth did not open, but a voice hit her like sub-bass from within her skull. You do not have the language for what we are. Kaya raised the edge of her coat, shielding her face, not from debris but belief. The air near the entity bent in logic-breaking spirals. Around it hovered faint impressions of choirboys stitched with radio antennae. Flares of Vatican symbology lashed to their backs like wings. This was not a scout. This was a remnant. A guardian of the Crescent archives. She didn't breathe. Any movement might trigger a protocol she couldn't begin to guess. But even still, the boy's glyph responded. It flared across her collarbone with a pulse she couldn't suppress, and the remnant stopped. Its head tilted. You bear the scar of the drowned one. He is marked unspeakable. You are in breach. Kaya whispered. He remembered. The thing froze. She took a step forward, unsure whether this counted as courage or foolishness. He remembered everything. Even what you erased. That word erased cut through the field like a magnetic shard. The remnant's aura blinked, then wavered. A flicker passed through it, and for a moment she saw a child's face. No older than 8. Hair singed. Eyes raw from crying. Holding a crescent coin to his heart. Then the flicker was gone, and the guardian surged toward her. Kaya ran. She didn't make for the exit. That would be expected. She dove instead into the collapsed corridor beneath the planetary mechanism, where the chalk runes still held their charge. Her hand touched the boy's glyph again and muttered the pattern he'd etched into her dreams. Soften, fold, remember. The floor opened. Not physically but perception ally. And she fell not down but inward. Into memory. Not her own. But someone else's. And it was on fire.
Chapter 11. Dreaming in Blue Fire.
Chapter Separator. The descent was not into darkness but into a realm where light itself seemed to breathe, pulsating with hues of cerulean and indigo that defied the natural order. Kaya felt her consciousness unravel, threads of thought intertwining with memories not her own, as if the very fabric of her being was being rewoven by unseen hands. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and something sweeter, reminiscent of blooming nocturnal flowers that only existed in forgotten dreams. Her footsteps made no sound upon the ground, which shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting not her image but scenes from lives she had never lived. A child chasing a kite beneath a sky of twin moons. A warrior standing atop a mountain of bones, screaming defiance into the void. A mother cradling a child whose eyes glowed with the fire of stars. Each vision flickered and faded as she passed, leaving behind a trail of emotions that clung to her like dew. Voices whispered in languages both ancient and unborn, weaving a tapestry of sound that resonated within her bones. She could not discern individual words, yet the meaning was clear. She was expected, and the path ahead was one she had walked before, in lifetimes long forgotten. The landscape shifted with each step, morphing from crystalline forests to vast deserts of shimmering sand, to oceans suspended in the sky. Time held no dominion here. Moments stretched into eternities, and eternities collapsed into instants. Kaya's senses were overwhelmed, yet she pressed on, driven by a purpose she could not name but felt deep within her core. The blue fire surrounded her, not consuming but embracing, its flames dancing to a rhythm that matched the beating of her heart. In its glow she saw faces, some familiar, others alien, each bearing expressions of hope, sorrow, and expectation. They reached out to her, their touch ethereal yet grounding, anchoring her to this surreal reality. As she moved forward, the path narrowed, leading to a structure that defied geometry, its angles shifting and impossible. At its center stood a figure cloaked in robes woven from starlight, its face obscured by a veil of shadows. The figure raised a hand, and the world around them stilled. "Kaya," it spoke, its voice echoing both within and outside her mind. "You have come far, but the journey is just beginning." She stepped closer, questions burning within her, but the figure raised its other hand, and the blue fire surged, engulfing them both. In that moment, understanding flooded her. A revelation not of knowledge but of purpose. She was the bridge between worlds, the key to unlocking a future shaped by the memories of the past. The flames receded, and she found herself standing alone, the figure gone, but its presence lingering like the afterglow of a dream. The path behind her had vanished, and before her lay a new horizon, waiting to be explored. Kaya wandered into the emberlit hollow beneath the reef where the drowned lighthouses leaned in moonless sleep, their lenses calcified with barnacles and gilt, and there she first heard the hymn of the blue fire. It wasn't sound in the ordinary sense. It was pressure in her ribs, a slow tightening at the base of the throat, and a warmth behind the eyes like fevered memory blooming. The glyph on the boy's back had begun to itch again, even though they were a quarter tide from the Vatican ruins, and she swore she saw vapor drift from his shoulders, blue-white and pulsing like a lost aurora. They'd anchored their raft against the tide-gnarled moorings, bones of an old pier sticking up like ribs from a ship-eaten ghost, and the sea had gone strangely calm. Above them loomed the remains of an oil platform, now half consumed by coral and prophecy, its derricks sagging with chains of kelp and prayer flags left by the salt widows who once believed the drowned dead could rise if only the Vatican would stop sealing the gates. But Kaya knew the gates were open, always had been, in secret places. The boy, whose name he still would not give, had started to speak in his sleep again, whispering the names of cities no longer on any map, and when she traced his spine with her fingers, she felt the sigil heat like a forge rune. He'd been dreaming in blue fire, dreaming of things that had not happened yet. She knew it as the way the flamekeepers sometimes foresaw eruptions before they split the seabed, or how the last daughters of Bari would blink salt from their eyes and name ships fated to sink. Blue fire dreaming meant a kind of dangerous remembering forward. They pressed deeper into the hollow, past the long-forgotten lifeboats turned into chapel shrines, past murals scorched into concrete by lightning priests during the stormfall, until they reached the coral chamber, a cavern with walls of fossilized hymnals and glass-melted scripture. Kaya knelt and placed both palms on the floor. The stone thrummed beneath her skin like heartwood still beating. The boy stood in the circle of blue kelp light, and the glyph on his back flared again, casting light across the chamber. It revealed in sudden brilliance the etchings along the walls, tales of the Red Cross armies burning bridges to flood black towns, of scouts who baptized bombs and called them blessings, of moons falling not from gravity but guilt. Then the voices began to rise, not from the dead, but from the drowned memories stored in the very coral, as if every injustice the sea had swallowed had fermented into song. Kaya fell to her knees, overwhelmed. These were not simply dreams, they were records. Blue fire was memory weaponized, memory given root and flame. The choir sang of women who walked into rising water rather than betray names. It sang of children taken from one shore and found centuries later on another, unchanged and burning. It sang of the gates Vatican hands had closed and locked behind sigils too complex for any living tongue. The boy sobbed soundlessly, and Kaya placed her hand on his chest, grounding him in the present. But the blue fire visions kept coming, unstoppable now. Kaya saw the floodgate sigils tattooed beneath the tongue of a veiled cardinal, their shapes identical to the boy's back. She saw the original Vatican expedition, not to preserve but to extract, to weaponize songs of mourning turned militant. She saw the choir imprisoned in iron lungs beneath black chalk monasteries, their voices filtered through machines until their grief could be market-tested. Then she saw herself. Not as she was but as she would become. Crowned not in gold but in coral, her arms sleeved in scars shaped like anchor glyphs, leading a procession of drowned cities reborn. The boy stood beside her, no longer silent, his mouth open and spilling blue fire script into the sky like smoke. She recoiled, gasping. The future had touched her like a harpoon kiss. When the blue fire receded, the choir faded into gentle currents, and the cavern dimmed back into its ancient hush. The boy collapsed, half-conscious but breathing. Kaya cradled him, their heat mingling against the salt-wet stone. She knew now why he had no name. He'd been stripped of it when the Vatican sealed his fate. Glyphs like his weren't just marks of exile. They were ciphers, passwords, living keys to Gates' long-thought myth. His body was a map, and blue fire dreaming was the compass. She pulled the boy close and whispered songs of the old towns, naming rivers and ruins and mother's prayers, trying to tether him here. For she knew the next time he dreamed he might not come back.
Chapter 12. The Waterbound Decree.
Chapter Separator. The sea had never been silent, but now it screamed in tongues only the drowned could decipher. Kaya stood at the precipice of the submerged sanctum, where the waters churned with memories not her own. The air was thick with salt and prophecy, each breath a communion with the past's unresolved grief. Beneath her feet, the mosaic of shattered shells and bone fragments told tales of cities lost to time and tide. The decree had been etched into the very fabric of the ocean, a binding contract between the living and those claimed by the depths. It was not written in ink but in the blood of those who had dared to defy the natural order, their sacrifices a testament to the cost of remembrance. As Kaya descended into the abyssal chamber, the weight of generations pressed upon her shoulders, each step a journey through epochs of submerged histories. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent glyphs, their glow illuminating the path of the chosen. She reached the altar, a monolith of coral and obsidian, where the decree awaited its next bearer. Her fingers traced the ancient script, the words searing into her skin, branding her as the vessel of the sea's will. The waters rose around her, not to drown but to anoint, enveloping her in a baptism of purpose. Visions flooded her mind, of battles waged beneath the waves, of alliances forged in the shadow of leviathans, of songs sung in languages long forgotten. The decree was clear. The balance must be maintained, the memories preserved, the drowned honored. Kaya emerged from the depths transformed, the decree now a part of her essence, guiding her towards a destiny intertwined with the ocean's eternal rhythm. The decree was not made with words, nor ink, nor seal of mortal hand. It thundered across the deep in the hush between moonrise and the swells of morning tide. When all breath held in reverence and dread, Kaya felt it before she heard it. Before the whisper spires of the submerged palace sang the binding tones in cracked blue fire, before the teeth of drowned bells told beneath leagues of salt and coral, she tasted it, something sharp in the water, a rust like old blood and sacred coins, something ancient clawing back toward the present. The decree had been dreamed before it was declared, and the dream was not hers. It came through the coral beds like a wound. She floated above the reef-choked bones of what had once been a sunken church, the stained glass now sea-mottled and coated in mollusk calcification. The cross above the steeple was snapped and reef-fed. The visages of old saints were unrecognizable, sea-warped into figures whose eyes had all turned black. She hovered barefooted over the nave where pews had once lined up like compliant ranks, now strewn in half-crescents, gnawed apart by tide and time. The sea had made no effort to forget. And Kaya understood, as the glyphs pulsed beneath her skin, as the voice of the decree came through her ribs in vibration rather than sound, that memory itself had become law. The water boiled around the horizon. Faintly, shapes moved in the gloom, columns of light-armored silhouettes, all faceless, wrapped in papal red, boots dustless under ocean flow, moving not with swimming grace but with a marching gait. They moved through impossible currents. Their presence gave shape to the sea itself. Kaya watched them pass like a school of armored saints, though none bore weapons, only the long sigil staffs etched with crescentate crossbones. At their center moved the adjutant, garbed in regalia untouched by salt. His voice was a hush of bellows, his thoughts not his own but channeled from a deeper throne. "The daughters are unbound," he murmured to the sea. "The pact is lapsed. The memory unchained." Kaya dove. The reefscape blurred past as she cut through the cathedral's broken windows. Ghosts of drowned nuns knelt in procession around her, their habits made of dark kelp, their eyes hollow coins. She did not look at them too long. She had learned from Chapterhouse Red that to stare at a sea prayer too long was to be written into it. Downward she spiraled, toward the archive wound, where the recorders of flesh had once written law into tide and vein. This was the place the decree would have first echoed. And it was here the waterbound decree would be housed, locked not in vaults but in flesh, a host somewhere beneath, bearing the tide-marked sigil of decree. The archive was a hollowed whale's skull the size of a ballroom. Its jaw was flanked with carved coral towers and censer shells swinging on chains that still bled ink. Inside, the membrane walls throbbed with waterlight, and voices murmured from within. She heard her name before she entered. Kaya. It was not a call. It was a naming. The way a trialer speaks a sentence before delivering it, the way a prophet names a death before the fire is lit. The syllables arrived in her blood before they found her ears. The archive had remembered her. She passed the bent altar of the ninefold sigil and approached the glyph skin carrier, sealed in amber brine at the center of the archive, a girl not much older than herself, floating in slow spiral, her body covered in script. It was not ink. It was something far older, something living. The sigils crawled and reshaped as Kaya approached. Her heart beat in tides. With each beat the decree revealed another sentence, another law. Let memory be mouth. Let silence be shield. Let the daughters remember. Kaya reached out. Her fingers brushed the amber brine membrane. Heat coursed through her, and in the moment her flesh met the glyphs she fell, not in water but in memory. The world inverted. She stood on a salt-cracked hill overlooking a desert sea, red dust painting the sky. The waters had not yet returned. The world burned dry and the armies of the cross marched under banners of pale fire. Boy soldiers knelt at the crests of cities, lighting the charges beneath dams whose waters had once fed 10 million lives. The orders had come from the citadel of doctrine, where flood and fire were mapped equally into scripture. The glyph was branded into each child soldier's chest, a sigil of binding, 1 part holy, 2 parts imperial. She watched one of them fall, then rise, then fall again. The boy who fell twice. His name was not spoken. His story was made prophecy, then forgotten by command. Kaya returned to herself in a shudder. The archive's breath was her own now. The decree was not just remembered, it had become a part of her. The sigils from the amber-born girl had leapt, etched themselves along her arms, coiling around her spine. She gasped. Behind her the sea had gone still. Then a voice, not from the archive, not from the ghosts, pierced the silence. You where they're wound now. Kaya turned. The boy stood at the edge of the archive's hollow, seaweed across his shoulders, eyes like moon-cracked glass. The same sigil was burned into his chest, the same that had hovered in the decree. But it was changing. The mark squirmed, rippled as if something inside him struggled against it. He looked at her with the eyes of someone who had seen his own death and awoken to remember it. You were there, he said. She shook her head. I only saw. No. You remembered. That's different. His voice quaked not with fear, but with rage held under cold water. They tried to write it out of me. Tried to drown it. The Red Cross Army, the Vatican dredgers, the Brotherhoods of Salted Light. They failed. But memory is a thing that cuts in both directions. If you carry the decree, then you carry my name. Say it. Kaya didn't speak. The name had not been given. The sigils had not shaped it yet. He looked at her with a mournful kind of fury. Then you don't know what's coming. She stepped forward. I know they buried cities under water and called it mercy. They called it salvation. Same lie. Different collar. His hand moved to the edge of the archive's threshold. The reef shifted. Something groaned far below. An old gate or a tether. They're still hunting. The Red Cross Army didn't end. They sank. The crescent fall? That was just their prayer said backward. Kaya's eyes narrowed. Then what do we do? His face hardened. We wake them. She wanted to say no. She wanted to say you don't wake the sea after it swallowed the dead. But something in her, something deeper than thought, began to echo the decree. Let silence be shield. Let memory be mouth. They would need to speak what had been unwritten. They would need to wake the drowned. The glyphs shimmered in the tide like drowned commandments, their edges etched with salt rime in the algae moss tongues of centuries. Kaya stood waist-deep among the breakers where the submerged steps of the waterbound court once rose like a coral crown above the waves. Now they slept beneath the sea, a slanted procession of barnacle-laced columns and serpent-arched porticos crusted with the silence of verdicts too old for mortal breath. The decree had not been read in 400 years, not since the sea courts fell to Vatican flame and holy gas. Yet the current knew it. The moon remembered. And the bones of drowned queens still sang it into the shale. Kaya lifted her arms, not in invocation but in imitation. She mimicked the sweeping gestures carved into the submerged plinths, echoing each curve of wrist and cant of palm. Her grandmother had said the decree was not just law but liturgy, that it must be performed with the whole body so the water would listen. The water doesn't care for words, she had said, braiding Kaya's hair on an oil drum throne. It listens through blood. Through breath. Through bone. Kaya moved with the precision of the old rites, feet slipping on stone slick with eelgrass. She did not speak the glyphs aloud but let them spiral through her marrow, the way a dream moves under skin long after waking. Beneath her something stirred. A tremor. Not in the earth but in the water's memory. It did not shudder upward but diffused outward, like an exhale held too long. The submerged floor began to glow faintly, revealing the full circle of the water-bound sigil beneath her feet. A massive tidal eye, it spiraled with seals and shackles, declarations etched in languages long ground from the mouths of surface historians. This was not history. This was debt. This was the cost of betrayal rendered tidal. Kaya stepped to the center, the glyphs responding with dull luminescence. Her shadow flickered, stretching across the runes in unnatural symmetry. And then she heard them, voices not from the sea but from the silt, from the marrow of what had once been law. The waterbound daughters who had drowned themselves rather than sign the Vatican Treaty. Their lament coiled through Kaya's lungs, forcing her breath to slow. Their words had no tongue, no grammar. They were pressure, ache, the sensation of sobbing beneath the surface and never rising. Suddenly the moon snapped free of cloud cover, and the glyphs burst into searing light, not golden but blue-white, the color of truth scraped raw. Kaya's body seized with the force of ancestral memory unlocking. Her spine straightened. Her arms bent into the gesture of the final clause. So long as the sea is wide, we are not broken. It was the vow of the water-bound sovereigns before the sundering. A statement of survival, of refusal. A curse and a promise knotted into one. She screamed it, not with voice but with blood, the pressure of it causing her ears to bleed. The sea answered. Not with thunder or tide but with stillness. As if the ocean had paused, turned to listen. The calm shattered as 3 black-tide galleys broke the horizon, silent ships of the Vatican's resurgent crosswake order, their hulls lined with harpoons soaked in saints' oil and scripture. Kaya ducked beneath the surge just as one let fly a cry javelin, the sound alone cracking the surface of the sea like lightning split sideways. She dove deep, the rune's light dimming behind her as the sacred floor closed again beneath layers of silt. But she had read enough. Memorized enough. The decree was in her bones now. She swam until her lungs burned, until the sound of war above dimmed and the voices of the drowned settled once more into humming silence. Above, the crosswake ships hovered over the vanished sigil, unaware of what had been reignited. Below, Kaya floated in the shadows of drowned palaces, her eyes wide with the weight of the vow now stitched through her ribs. The waterbound decree was no longer a relic. It had been read. It had chosen a mouth. And the war it prophesied had already begun.
Chapter 13. Glenmeyer's Teeth.
Chapter Separator. The seafloor wept iron where Glenmeyer's teeth jutted through sediment like the jagged bones of a broken jaw. Once a fortress reef guarding the passage between the barrier archipelago and the drowned continent's former capital, it was now a graveyard of half-melted sigil stones and rust-slicked insignias, their engravings gnawed smooth by centuries of salt. Kaya moved carefully through the wreckage, her gloved fingers tracing a broken crest, twin serpents coiled around a trident that had once belonged to the sovereigns of the Azure Meridian, a house history said vanished before the first dam ever fell. But here it was, fractured but defiant, lodged between the ribbed frames of a collapsed dreadnought, long since claimed by coral and abyssal ivy. The hymnstones trembled faintly beneath her boots. She felt them before she heard them, echoes of a chant that did not belong to the daughters. It was not verse taught in the deep sanctuaries, not the harmonies the wave-callers passed down nor the remembered melodies of the sisterhood. This was deeper, older, sung in octaves that should have withered lungs and burst blood vessels, but which thrummed like a drumline in her sternum. Her breath hitched. She followed the song through a sunken archway where vermilion moss clung to walls scrawled with forbidden glyphs. They were not the Vatican-sealed brands scorched into rebel children, but flowing sigils marked in looped elegance, like water drawn in ink. She whispered them beneath her breath, not fully knowing what they meant, only that her blood remembered. And then she saw them, the water-bound brotherhood. Half shadow, half man, they stood shoulder-deep in a trench filled with blacklight silt. They wore the crescent-armored relics of the drowned kings, bone-white and inked in red kelp dye, each bearing a spiral cut into the throat. Not one flinched as she approached. Their leader stepped forward, pulling back his helm to reveal eyes slick with membrane, not like her own, which blinked with salt, but something amphibious caught between gill and gasp. He looked younger than she'd imagined, barely older than the boy who fell twice. But it was the song spilling from his mouth that told her the truth. He was kin to the sigil-bearers, heir to the last covenant the daughters had not kept. "You were never alone beneath," he said, voice barely more than a current. "Only deaf to what we remembered." Kaya stared, unsure whether to answer with silence or flame. These were the sons the world insisted were gone, those the cross drowned first, whose tongues were broken before they could speak the names aloud. And yet they sang still, in frequencies that curled through drowned cathedrals and dormant war bells. The boy who fell twice had not yet returned from his fevered sleep, but when he did, she knew now, there would be verses he could answer, truths carved into the marrow of the sea itself. Salt crusted the boy's eyelashes, though his eyes did not close. The sea had not taken him whole. It had swallowed and studied him, turned him over in its mouth like a stone not yet smoothed, then spat him into the broken shallows beneath the cracked teeth of Glenmire. Here the tides bore no mercy. Here wrecks clung to the coastline like bloated ribs, fleshless mansions upturned and groaning, all of it caught in Glenmire's iron gullets, the labyrinthine sinkholes of the drowned range. No maps remembered this place. Only the waterbound did, and they whispered of it in lullabies sung low to children who would not sleep. "Glenmire gnaws, Glenmire grieves," they said, "and he keeps what the Empire tried to drown." Kaya stood ankle-deep in the silt-slicked shallows, the horizon fevered with stormlight. The boy who had fallen twice, once from land, once from what lay beneath, crouched beside her, cradling his bandaged wrist. The sigil was no longer burning. Instead, it glowed dully beneath the linen wrap like a hidden ember. It had shifted again, this time echoing the crescent pattern she had seen carved into the drift bones of old sovereigns. Yet this was different. The glyph was not Vatican-made nor sung by the daughters. It was something else. Something forbidden or lost. She didn't know which unsettled her more. "You're sure this is where the Brotherhood sang?" Kaya asked. The boy nodded without looking at her. "I don't remember their faces, but I remember the sound." "What did it sound like?" He paused, pressing his palm to the tidal sand. "Like teeth grinding together. Like 1,000 ribs clattering. But under that song. A song that made the sea tremble." In Glenmire's embrace, nothing remained still for long. Ghost tides surged from nowhere, gulping the shore like an untrained breath. On one such surge, the remains of a cathedral window, a rose-shaped frame fused with coral, surfaced briefly before vanishing again. It was not the first structure she had seen resurrected by the tide. Glenmire, they'd said, was not a place but a punishment, the Empire's final act of spite, to sink the cities they could not tame, and to salt the earth above them so no roots could return. What they did not expect was what survived beneath. The Red Cross Army's maps had shown Glenmire as empty, flooded, erased. But maps lied. They could not chart grief or memory. They could not mark the hymns etched into bone or the hidden vaults still sealed with brine glyphs older than empire. Glenmire had been a capital once. Not of trade or government but of song. It was here Kaya now realized that the first water-bound sovereigns gathered to exchange not weapons or coins, but verses, spells, vows. And it was here that the Red Cross Army had sung silence into them, bombed the shorelines until the waves would not carry voices anymore. But the voices had gone deeper, not gone. They first heard it at dusk, the subaqueous hum that vibrated in the soles of her feet before it reached the ear. The boy stilled. "They're here," he whispered. "They've been here the whole time." Rising from the surf came figures that moved like reef light, refracted and wavering. They wore armor of barnacled leather, scale-woven cloaks that shimmered with tide glass, and on their bare chests and open forearms were the sigils of kings, not etched in ink but raised as scars. These were not Vatican-sanctioned brands. They were glyphs of inheritance, carried in flesh by those who refused to be archived, categorized, or erased. Some wore masks of driftwood or carved stone, others went barefaced, their eyes pale from lifetimes below sunless waves. The leader, taller than the rest, his beard entwined with kelp threads, stepped forward. "You carry the mark of salt blood," he said to the boy. Kaya stepped between them instinctively. He doesn't know what it means. He doesn't need to. It knows him. The boy stood then, lifting his wrapped wrist. "You were the ones who sang when I drowned." The leader nodded. "And you heard us. That makes you heir." "To what?" "To Glenmire. To the song. To what the daughters forgot." A silence stretched, the air heavy with more than mist. Kaya spoke before she could stop herself. "Why would the daughters forget anything? Our choirs were entire libraries." The leader's smile held no mockery. Only exhaustion. "Not forget," he said. "Forbidden. There were verses sung only by the sovereigns who ruled both sea and blood. The empire feared that. So they severed the bloodlines. Bombed the sons, drowned the kings, buried their songs. But the daughters were allowed to remain because they only knew half the truth. Beautiful, mournful, but incomplete." The boy turned to Kaya. "So I'm not one of them. I'm not yours." Kaya flinched. "No. You're more than that. You're what we lost." The brotherhood began to hum again. Not a melody but a memory. And as they sang, the sea seemed to part, revealing a spiral staircase of carved stone descending into the deep. It pulsed with faint bioluminescence. The leader gestured. "It's time." "For what?" the boy asked. "To remember." The drowned boy had not yet shed the silence lodged between his ribs, but the sea spoke on his behalf. It carried whispers in the brine, harmonies folded into tide currents, murmurs that clung to Kaya's skin like salt frost. She stood at the edge of the canted ruin once known as Glenmire, where steeples, schoolhouses, and black-owned boarding lodges lay barnacled and broken beneath a mosaic of crushed coral and rusted steel. No reef grew naturally here. It was forced by bomb blasts, floodgate overflows, and generations of sediment trying to forget. The sea always forgets slowly. Glenmire had once been a sovereign seat, older than any Vatican ledger could bear to admit, its rulers tattooed in silverglyph, its healers sea-versed, its seers blind by choice and burning with knowledge. But it was the teeth Kaya came to see. Glenmire's teeth. The great tusks of what the Red Cross Army called submerged fortification zones, though none of them could explain the structure's eerie curvature, the iridescence that clung to the arches like opal scales, or the harmonic resonance triggered when one of the arches was touched. Kaya stepped into the mouth of one, glyph-marked boy close behind, his breath ragged and lips blue-tinged despite the warm tide. He had not spoken since the glyph appeared. The sigil on his chest, burned there by a seal not even the song-mothers could read, glowed faintly when the water stilled. The arch responded to that glow. The chamber bloomed in sound. Not a song but a hum, low and aching like a cathedral organ bruised by centuries. And then they came. Not the daughters. Not the wave-singers or the drown-blessed. Men. Not landmen. Not the shore-born priests who fed the fire lines. These were water-bound. Kaya knew the old chants, half-wrecked verses in journals hidden by her mother, or etched into coral walls by flame-keeping divers who swore they'd seen something in the Glenmire deep. The Brotherhood of the Flood Oath. Said to be wiped out in the first dam strikes. Said to be cursed to silence. Said to be traitors. But they stood now, 6 of them, emerging from the flooded vestibules as if they had never left. Their limbs bore the scale ink of ancient sovereigns, a language parallel to the daughters' songs but rhythmically more violent, percussive, almost warlike. They circled Kaya and the boy slowly, not hostile but not reverent either. The eldest among them, eyes filmed in kelp-blue cataract, beard webbed with mollusk, touched the glyph on the boy's chest without asking. He recoiled. The glyph flared. And the chamber answered. This time the hum shattered into rhythm. Drumbeats. Cymbal strikes. Chant lines. Male voices deep and resonant, singing verses Kaya didn't know. Verses she'd never been taught. Forbidden verses. The daughters had always said there were reasons the boys were taken, drowned, or silenced. They said the ocean bore no kings, only sirens. But this was no siren song. This was war song. Memory song. And the boy, shivering under the weight of their chorus, dropped to his knees as if his bones recognized what his tongue could not. The eldest sang his name, Sar. The rest repeated it. Sar, Sar, Sar. The boy gasped and finally spoke, one syllable rasped from a voice not yet healed. Why? Kaya couldn't answer. She turned to the eldest. Why him? She asked, the question sour in her throat. The brother knelt beside the boy and ran a callous thumb down the glyph's center. Because he fell twice, the old man said. And only the twice fallen remember the sovereigns. Kaya frowned. What does that mean? The chamber pulsed with sound again. This time a wave of harmonics so dense it knocked salt from the walls and stirred the plankton silt from the floor. In the noise Kaya caught words fragmented but familiar. Sigils erased, truth salted, songs severed. The Vatican didn't just drown the towns, said another brother, voice thick with depth pressure. They targeted those marked with the language they could not read. Every sovereign with a glyph that didn't match their scripture, taken, flooded, silenced. Kaya's breath grew short. That included her grandfather. That included the missing uncles never spoken of. And the daughters, she asked. Why weren't we taught? The eldest looked at her with something close to sorrow. Because the ones who survived were forced to forget. They weren't permitted to carry the bloodlines. They carried only the burden. The sovereign line passed down differently. And the wave song, they split it. The daughters got the surface. The brothers, what's left of us, kept the trench verse. Kaya turned to the boy. So what is he? The eldest rose slowly. A bridge. The boy who fell twice. Once from the land, once from memory. He carries both languages. Both verses. But only if he remembers. The boy twitched. The glyph on his chest sparked briefly. And if he doesn't? Kaya asked. The old man sighed. Then everything that Salt took stays buried. They left Glenmire with the boy unconscious but breathing steady. The brothers would not follow. They claimed no allegiance to the living cities now, only to what the drowned still remembered. Kaya asked if more of them survived. The eldest gestured toward the trench. They listen, he said. They do not rise. On the surface, Kaya tried to process what she'd seen. The Red Cross Army had long been thought nothing more than zealots and soldiers, destroyers of freedom towns, burners of coast altars. But now she understood, they were executioners, yes, but also scavengers of language. They hadn't just erased culture. They dissected it. What songs they couldn't repurpose, they drowned. What sigils they couldn't rewrite, they obliterated. The entire map of the Black Deep diaspora had been rewritten in blood, brine, and amnesia. She couldn't tell the others yet. Not the high choir. Not even Miri. They wouldn't believe her. Not without the boy speaking. And not without the verses. But Kaya now knew what the Vatican had truly feared. The convergence. A boy who carried a glyph older than any choir book. Brothers singing beneath the drowned cities. Daughters with fractured memory. If they were ever to rise again, not just survive, not just mourn, but rise, then it would take both halves of the song. All that the Salt took had to be unsung. Unforgotten. And deep beneath Glenmire, in the shadowed arc of Glenmire's teeth, the old verses stirred again. Not just in voice, but in current. In the blood. In the bones of the boy who fell twice, and might, if Kaya read the tide correctly, rise a third time, this time as something the Vatican had no name for.
Chapter 14. A Castle Beneath No Flag.
Chapter Separator. The trench maps didn't mark it. The salt-bound archives Kaya had stolen from the drowned monastic outposts in Crescent Fall made no mention of it either. It existed in rumor only, referenced obliquely in a half-burnt prayer book buried beneath the skulls of a choir drowned in blue fire. No name. No coordinates. Just a phrase repeated across 2 centuries of sea-scribed memory. The castle beneath no flag. Even the wave mothers, those haunted archivists of deep memory, refused to speak of it directly. Some said it was the first sovereign city to be claimed by the flood, not broken by war or dam sabotage but abandoned willingly, its leaders singing the sigils off their own skins before disappearing into the black waters. Others whispered it was a trap laid by the Vatican itself, a sunken edifice meant to draw in those still seeking sovereign bloodlines and entomb them in brine-scripted illusions until they forgot why they had ever sung. Kaya didn't care. If it held a piece of what was lost, of what the boy might be, then she would find it. And she would enter. Flagless or not. The boy had begun to speak again, but not in full words. Phrases surfaced in his sleep, fragments of songs that triggered silt ripples around him when spoken aloud. Names none of the surviving daughters had ever taught. Verses Kaya dared not repeat without first binding her tongue with salt cord. He had stopped eating, except when submerged in seawater drawn from Glenmire's teeth, which seemed to feed him through osmosis. The glyph on his chest no longer flared randomly. It pulsed like a living tide clock, and Kaya believed it was guiding them. It drew her west, beyond the edges of the known shallows, past the ruins of the first flooded counties, where the ocean thickened with centuries of drowned red clay and the screams of bridges detonated mid-evacuation. There the water shifted tone. A deepening. A pull. They found it on the 4th night. A full moon choked in storm clouds above. A stillness below that Kaya recognized not as calm but waiting. No markers. No shellstone reefs. No glow-urchin webs or drowned radio towers tangled in net. Just a shape in the dark. Angular. Inverted. A tower that rose downward from the underside of the ocean. It didn't shimmer like other structures, nor bleed silt from its base. It stood untouched by coral or memory growth, as if preserved by force of will alone. When Kaya touched its surface, her hand ached, not from cold or pressure, but from familiarity. This wasn't ruin. This was architecture. The boy stirred in her arms and whispered a name. Hiran. Struck Kaya like a weight. Not a word but a designation. A name not meant for mouths. Something sovereign. Something seaborn. The tower responded. Its walls flared with ink-light patterns that danced and coiled away before they could be read. A door opened not outward or inward but as if peeling away from itself. Kaya stepped in and the sea did not follow. No pressure. No wet. The boy was dry in her arms, breathing, skin flushed with heat. The chamber was airless but breathable, lit by a kind of anti-lantern that darkened the walls while illuminating the space between. At the center stood a throne made of hull metal and coral shard, unoccupied but not abandoned. Kaya did not speak. She stepped forward, her breath syncing with the pulse of the glyph on the boy's chest. A presence met her, not a figure but an echo. Something behind the air. A voice remembered by the structure itself, or perhaps left as a sentry in the marrow of the stone. It asked no questions. Didn't need to. It knew her blood. It knew the boy's. And it wept. Not audibly, not emotionally, but architecturally. The walls changed. Images formed, not murals but memories cast in shifting silt light. A line of sovereigns, male and female, bearing glyphs erased from choir books and drowned in firewater. Children raised in verse libraries, trained to shape tide with sound alone. A ceremony interrupted by the Vatican's first silent fleet, their white sails wet with black powder. The castle had no flag because it had no allegiance left to offer. Not to land. Not to war. Not even to memory. It had chosen exile. It had buried itself alive. Kaya turned to the throne. The glyph on the boy's chest began to bleed. Not fluid but color. Ink patterns spilled from the mark and slithered down his ribs, across his arms, forming new verses she couldn't read but somehow felt. She placed him in the throne. The glyph flared once, then steadied. And the castle groaned, not in pain but recognition. A lighthouse relit. A seal unlocked. From the floor, new passages uncoiled. Downward. Always downward. Kaya followed. The descent did not feel linear. Each step stretched something inside her. Time. Language. Her own skin itched with forgotten hymns. She began to hear footsteps beside her. Echoes out of rhythm with her own. She didn't look. She wouldn't give the memory shape until it demanded it. The deeper they went, the more the walls whispered. Not words. Names. Titles. Tide Warden. Heir of the Ashglyph. Breaker of floodlines. They weren't hers. They were his. The boy. Tsar. The one who fell twice. The one meant not to reign but to remember. At the final chamber, Kaya found what the Vatican had feared most. A room of preserved sigils. Carved into salt crystal. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. The lost glyphs of the sovereign houses. Not the corrupted symbols painted in Vatican red on drowned church walls, but the true shapes, alive, shifting with tone, responding to presence. One pulsed when she neared. Another writhed when the boy stirred. And a third shattered silently into dust the moment her breath touched it. Some were dead. Some weren't. And in the center of the room, a glyph too large to read pulsed in time with the boy's heartbeat. Kaya knelt. She did not sing. She did not question. She placed her hand against the largest glyph and whispered, "We remember." The sigil responded not with light, but with knowledge. Memory. Flooded into her veins, into her teeth, into her lungs. She saw the beginning, not of war but of defiance. How the sovereigns had once ruled not above the water, but within it. How the tideborn and the landbound were never meant to be divided. How the Vatican had not introduced religion but rupture. And how the first daughters had sealed themselves off from the brothers, not by force but by fear. Fear of what the memory might cost them. Kaya stood, salt-winded and dizzy. The boy remained seated in the throne. He wasn't asleep. He wasn't awake. He was remembering. Not his life. All lives. He was the mnemonic core they had tried to erase. The last heir of a sovereignty that bore no crown and raised no banners. A castle beneath no flag because flags could be burned. Songs they hoped could not. Kaya turned to leave, but the passage sealed behind her. The castle would not let her take him. Not yet. He wasn't ready. He needed to finish remembering. She knelt once more and whispered a promise. Not to save him but to prepare the world for his return. When the glyph song ended. When the sovereign sea rose again. When the salt broke from the bones of drowned memory and sang. Even here in the hushed hush below drowned horizons, Kaya could feel the pull of names unspoken. The water bore them, those names like coiled shells half sunk in centuries, their etching worn by time but not forgotten. The boy walked beside her. His movement a silent echo of something older than the war they fled, older than the empire that broke the sky with its brass domes and bannered iron. He had not spoken since the floodgates above Glenmire's teeth, since the water had shown them the veiled tombs of sovereigns long erased, and their sigils burned into the very walls of the ruined holdfast they now approached. The castle beneath no flag rose from the silt with no pride, no defenders, its battlements shorn and barnacled, its towers broken like the teeth of a once majestic god. And yet the place throbbed with memory. Every step they took stirred some dormant echo. Children's songs twisted by centuries of pressure, chants from drowned choirs that sang through gurgled mouths, forbidden lullabies meant to keep the truth dreaming. The daughters would not come here. The sea told Kaya that much. Their voices thinned at the edges of this place, as if scared back by some other binding, some deeper, older decree. She felt it in her marrow now. This had once belonged to the waterbound brotherhood, and perhaps to the sovereigns before them. Sigils older than Vatican glass, older than Red Cross scrolls laced the outer walls. Not glyphs meant to be read but ones meant to be remembered, like scars, like ancestral oaths whispered into bone. They forgot this place, the boy finally said, his voice echoing strangely through the corridor they now entered, where no water should have followed but somehow did, always a thin film rippling along the stone. Or maybe they were made to. He touched the archway, his fingers lighting up with the salt mark as if some slumbering mechanism recognized him. They sealed us in stories. We became curses, fishtales, threats. But this was a throne once. Before the war over sigils. Before the dams. Kaya nodded slowly. She didn't know what crown he carried, only that it burned with no metal, bore no gem, only pressure, unrelenting, immense and ancestral. Something in the stone groaned. A door opened without hinges. Light, not Vatican or fireborn, flickered from within. Not gold, not red, but the pale blue of sovereign memory. Someone waited in that chamber, cloaked in the sea's longest-held secret.
Chapter 15. The Riftmaw Opens.
Chapter Separator. The sea had no bottom here. Not in the way Kaya understood depth. It was not a question of meters or pressure, but of memory. The deeper they descended, the more the water thickened, not with silt or debris but with time. Each stroke forward felt like swimming through centuries, through the sediment of forgotten wars and silenced songs. The boy, once a silent passenger in her arms, now led the way, his movements guided by an unseen current that responded to the glyphs etched into his skin. They pulsed softly, casting a pale light that revealed nothing and everything all at once. They had left the castle beneath no flag behind, its silent halls and dormant sigils fading into the darkness above. Ahead lay the Riftmaw, a place spoken of only in hushed tones among the daughters, a place where the sea was said to consume not just bodies but identities. It was here that the sovereigns had made their last stand, not with weapons but with memory. They had sung their names into the water, hoping that the sea would remember them even if the world did not. Kaya felt the pressure increase not just from the depth but from the weight of expectation. The boy was changing. His eyes, once filled with confusion, now held purpose. He moved with a certainty that belied his age, as if he had done this before, in another life, in another body. The glyphs on his skin began to shift, rearranging themselves into patterns Kaya could not decipher. They told a story, one that was older than the flood, older than the war, older than the sea itself. As they approached the Riftmaw, the water grew colder, sharper. It cut through Kaya's suit, through her skin, through her bones, until she felt as if she were made of ice. The boy did not seem to notice. He reached out, touching the edge of the maw, and the water responded. It parted, revealing a path lined with coral and bone, a path that led into the heart of the sea's memory. They entered and the world changed. The Riftmaw was not a place but a state of being. It was a library of the drowned, a cathedral of the forgotten. Voices echoed through the water, singing songs that had not been heard in centuries. Faces appeared in the coral, watching them pass with eyes that held both sorrow and hope. The boy moved among them, acknowledging each with a nod, as if he recognized them, as if they recognized him. Kaya followed, her mind overwhelmed by the weight of the memories around her. She saw the fall of the sovereigns, the rise of the Red Cross Army, the betrayal of the daughters. She saw herself not as she was but as she could have been, had the world been different. She saw the boy, not as he was but as he had been, as he would be. At the center of the maw they found the throne of tides, a seat carved from the bones of the first sovereign, a seat that had waited for its heir for centuries. The boy approached it, and the glyphs on his skin flared brightly. He sat and the sea responded. The voices grew louder, the faces clearer. The Riftmaw awakened. Kaya watched as the boy began to sing, his voice merging with the chorus of the drowned. The water vibrated with power, with memory. The sea remembered. It remembered the sovereigns, the daughters, the war, the flood. It remembered the truth. And it sang. The sea did not scream when it tore open, though Kaya would remember the sound as a scream anyway. It started with a tremor, faint but resolute, a tug at the salt beneath her tongue as she stood on the hull of the kelp-eaten barge. The surface of the water churned in slow spirals that did not match wind nor current, and then the spiral drew inward, deepening into a vortex with the solemnity of something ancient unsealing its lips after 1,000 years of silence. She felt the marrow of the world shift beneath her as the rift maw opened. An absence, a cathedral-shaped wound in the ocean floor. Not an ordinary trench or rift, but a place cut by intention and kept shut by force. And now released. The blue fire flickering across her wrists flared to life without her command, singing against the sigils carved there long ago. She heard the low chant of the waterbound brotherhood somewhere beneath, though no lips moved on deck and no surface-born thing could shape those syllables. It was them, those thought extinct, the singers of the deep verses, the brothers forgotten by the salt-etched songs of the daughters. And they were calling. Or warning. She looked toward the boy who fell twice, now sitting half asleep in the cradle of a coral basket netted to the side of the barge. His skin still marked with the Vatican-seared glyph, pulsed faintly like a heartbeat caught under ice. He'd stopped speaking since the last dreamwave, the one where he saw the cruciform-shaped tower rise and fall in the drowned capital of Glenmire's teeth, surrounded by bodies that sang as they sank. But now he stirred, whispering something Kaya couldn't hear. She leaned closer. "The maw doesn't open to release," he murmured, his voice papery with fatigue. "It opens to remember." Below them, the water twisted wider, its center showing no depth at all. Only dark, rimmed by flecks of luminous silt that danced like funeral ash in slow descent. The rift maw had not merely reopened. It was being read. The water itself had memory, etched in long spirals like the horns of extinct sea creatures, and the brotherhood below had begun decoding it. Kaya steadied herself as the hull groaned, algae-barnacled timbers protesting the pull downward. Around them other vessels, scavenged catamarans, rusting dredge barges, and a tangle of sailbone skiffs, had begun gathering, drawn either by the hum or some ancestral whisper buried in their keels. Those aboard did not speak. They watched. And waited. Kaya stepped toward the edge, blue fire now threading through her hair, illuminating the storm of salt mist curling above the maw. She remembered what the scroll fragments had hinted at. A place where the drowned sovereigns were entombed not in stone or crypts but in thought, sealed memories encoded and hidden beneath the seabed by those who could not kill them outright. The Vatican's Red Cross killers had called it cognitive quarantining, though the daughters called it by a different name, forgetcraft. They'd never admitted they knew where the maw lay. But the boy's dreams were undoing that. She descended a rope ladder, ignoring the wind that spiraled in reverse around her, eyes locked on the growing opening below. The closer she drew, the louder the chorus, not spoken, not sung, but intoned through pressure and current. The Brotherhood's deep verses were not made for surface tongues. They spoke in syllables shaped by current, silt, and temperature, language bent by pressure gradients. But Kaya felt them in her bones, her own voice rising without thought in answer. It was not just a summons. It was a call for witness. The boy climbed down behind her, his bare feet barely touching the rungs. "They killed the ones who sang this way," he whispered. "They didn't understand the sigils, so they drowned them not just once. They erased the second drowning." Kaya nodded. "Which means we're not here to open anything," she said. "We're here to listen." As they reached the lowest deck, the maw exhaled. Not water but memory. Images poured out not as visions but as tactile truths. Fragments of sensation, heat flash and tear trail, screams held in salt. Kaya saw the brothers kneeling, backs arched with song, as red-crossed ironclads loomed above them. She saw children with gill-marked necks being led into lightless vaults beneath mountain dams. She saw symbols carved into living coral and then shattered by holy hammers. And she saw a crown, not gold, not coral, but woven from black water, fall into the maw and disappear. The boy flinched. "That was his," he whispered. "The first sovereign. Before even Glenmire. They called him the Breakwater." Kaya placed her hand against the swirling edge of the vortex. Her palm burned, but the fire did not hurt. It clarified. The sigils along her wrist, dormant for months, blazed like etched moonlight, one after another responding to some old cadence. She whispered the word she hadn't meant to remember. By salt unforgotten. By flood unbroken. By verse unmuted. Let the drowned speak. The maw flared, then deepened again. A figure rose, not corporeal but not illusion either. A sovereign formed of sediment, memory, and blue fire. He bore no face Kaya recognized, but she knew his name from the old salt-bound ballads, Arisen. One of the drowned kings. One of the ones they'd said never existed. He did not speak. Instead, he raised one hand and behind him, the walls of the rift reshaped. The Brotherhood, still singing, formed a spiral around him, bodies dancing through the currents in a verse prayer that needed no air. Kaya felt her lungs tighten, and then release, as if the water itself was teaching her to breathe anew. The boy beside her reached out, and his glyph flared, connecting to the sigils on Kaya's arm like points in a drowned constellation. "This is why I fell," he whispered. "Not to survive. To return." The rift maw now pulsed like a heart, its rhythm echoing through the hulls above. The other vessels had drawn closer, but none dared descend. Only Kaya, the boy, and those whose lungs had long surrendered to the tide could withstand the memory storm surging upward. And the storm was building. The rift had not only remembered, it had decided. A reckoning was coming. Not just against the Red Cross slayers or the Vatican sanctifiers, but against forgetting itself. Against the long silence that the Empire had laid like a shroud over every tongue it broke and every hymn it buried. Kaya turned to the boy, whose eyes now shimmered with both fire and flood. "Do you remember his name?" she asked. The boy nodded. "He was never given one that survived. Then we'll call him what they feared." Kaya's voice trembled. "Memory." The maw surged upward, not in destruction but in voice. The water sang. Not in metaphor. In truth. The rift maw had opened not to drown the Empire again. It had opened to remind it what drowning meant.
Book 1 Epilogue.
Chapter Separator. What the salt remembered. There were no drums when the sea crowned her. No flutes nor chants. Only the shuddering hush of water remembering itself. Kaya knelt at the trench's edge, gill blood still running from her palms, where she had touched the boy's brand and awakened the verse etched beneath flesh. Around her the silence was full of listening. The drowned lights flickered beneath coral bones. She had breathed the rift maw's name and lived. Had seen it twitch in the dark, forming mouths of ruin that could not yet speak her name. She had not sung. She had named. And that was the first defiance. Behind her, the Brotherhood sang still, hoarse hymns from stone-throated men who should have been forgotten. Their song wove with hers now, not over it, not beneath, but as a second current. Not a challenge. A harmony. The boy who fell twice stood beside her, sea steam rising from his shoulders. His eyes were no longer the color of fear. "It called me saint," he said, voice rasped by brine and pain. "But saints die so others forget. Kings drown so memory burns." Kaya looked to him. Not anymore. She rose, coral-thorned, salt-slick, and marked by the wounds of something older than the Vatican could dream. Around her the trench breathed, a low murmur like a leviathan turning in its sleep. Above them in distant waters the lights of drowned towns stirred. One by one. Like stars woken from a curse. Her name was not sovereign. Not yet. But when she stepped from the ledge, the rift did not pull her down. It parted. And the salt sang.